"Mr. Roberts, you've been fired. Mr. Roberts, you've been fired." "Why?" I asked. "It doesn't matter why," the manager replied. One day, when I was thinking about how I only had a year left until retirement, a young manager joined our department. He called me over and suddenly told me I was being fired. I asked him why, but he refused to explain, so I had no choice but to accept it. I felt lost and told my wife, who looked shocked. The next day, I went to the office to collect my belongings, only to find my desk in a mess. "My name is Stephen Roberts. I'm an ordinary employee at a securities firm. I started here when I was 30, and I've worked hard for 29 years, with just 1 year left until retirement." The handover. "Mr. Roberts, I'd like to discuss this handover with you. Are you talking about this client?" I asked. "Yes," the manager said. "I've been assigned this company, but I'm not sure how to handle them. It's a good idea to have a detailed meeting with them," I replied. "They're very cautious, because this is a big transaction. If we can ease their concerns in our meetings, things should go smoothly." "I see. Thank you so much," he said. As I was nearing retirement, I had been handing off my responsibilities to my replacement. A new manager joins. I was glad to finally have a break from my usual work and looked forward to spending the rest of the year working on internal projects. Then one day, a new employee joined our department, having transferred from Tokyo. The branch manager introduced me to him, a young man named Taylor Norris. He introduced himself, saying, "I've recently been promoted to manager of this department. My name is Taylor Norris, and although I'm young, I'll do my best to lead you all as my father led this company. I'm excited to work with everyone." Hearing the last name Norris, I immediately thought of the CEO's son, and soon realized that this was, indeed, the CEO's son, appointed as our department head at only 25. First encounter with the new manager. "Who created this report?" he asked one day. "I did," I replied. "Why is the document in this format? Can you make it easier to read?" "The format was decided beforehand," I explained. "I just followed what was given." "I don't care when it was decided," he snapped. "If I find it hard to read, imagine how much more difficult it will be for my father, the CEO." "Do you present reports like this in front of him?" I apologized, and he added, "If I ever take over as president and see a report like this, I wouldn't want to read it. Make documents that catch my attention." Every time he spoke, he'd bring up his father's influence. The arrogant new manager. I knew the new manager was the CEO's son, but he was so arrogant. He just assigned tasks to us and left everything for us to handle. The other day, he even complained about a document I had prepared exactly the way he'd asked. Every time I mentioned something, he would bring up his father, so it was hard to talk to him. People were starting to complain. I often heard him mention his father, but I tried to ignore it since I planned to retire that year. A mysterious meeting. "Mr. Roberts, could you come here for a moment?" "Of course. How can I help?" I replied. "Let's talk in private in the meeting room." After my lunch break, I had just returned to work when the manager suddenly summoned me to a meeting. I wondered what I might have done wrong. Was it about a new client, a problem with an old client, or something more serious? I had no idea. "Is there an issue, sir?" I asked, curious, but a bit nervous. "No, it's just about something different," he replied. When I asked for more details, he didn't explain, only asked me to join him in the meeting room. As I walked there, I was filled with questions, unsure of what was going on. "Well, please have a seat," he said as I entered. "Yes, sir," I replied, sitting down. The sudden dismissal. "I'm going to be direct, Mr. Roberts, you're fired." I was stunned by his blunt announcement, completely caught off guard and at a loss for words. The manager handed me a termination letter, but I was too shocked to process it, trying to remember if I'd done anything wrong. Finally, I found my voice and asked him why. But he didn't give a clear reason. He just said, "This decision has already been made." Not satisfied, I asked him again and again, but he only replied, "It's a decision that's been made. You were going to retire next year anyway," he continued. "Think of it as early retirement. But I still have a year left, and I'm just as capable as anyone else," I argued. I've heard you've already handed over most of your tasks, and you're not doing any outside work. You're physically too old, aren't you? That's not true, I insisted. Regardless, it's been decided that you'll be fired. Leave the rest to us younger people. That's not fair, I said, frustrated. Do you even know who I am, Mr. Roberts? I could tell the CEO, and he'd agree with me, the manager replied, then left the room. I was left sitting there, dazed and unsure of what to do next. With no other choice, I headed home in silence, wondering how I'd explain this to my wife, but I knew I had to tell her. Breaking the news to my wife. As I drove home, my mind was racing. I worried about how to tell my wife that I'd been fired and whether it would make her anxious. I'm home, I called out when I arrived. Welcome home, I've made dinner, she replied warmly. After changing, I sat down for dinner, feeling the weight of my news. I have something important to tell you, I began. Does it have to do with why you seem down? She asked. Yes, I've been laid off, I said, avoiding eye contact, afraid she'd be disappointed. But to my surprise, her response was cheerful. I'm so happy you've finally left that company, she said, smiling. I looked up, shocked by her reaction. You've worked so hard all these years, she added. Now let's enjoy life a bit more. Seeing her smile lifted my spirits. She didn't blame me at all. The next morning, as she left for work, she simply said, "Take care." Returning to the office. The next day, I went back to the office to gather my belongings, but as I arrived, I noticed the place was unusually tense. I heard hushed conversations. What's happening with this client? Someone muttered. Who's responsible? Just then, I got a phone call. Another one came almost immediately after. When I reached my floor, I noticed the manager was in a full-blown panic. What's going on this morning? I asked a colleague. We've had major clients calling to cancel their contracts one after another, and no one knows why, he replied, looking worried. I was stunned. Our largest clients had suddenly started leaving, one by one. Chaos at the office. As the cancellations piled up, each person in charge of a major client was frantically trying to make contact, but no one could figure out what was wrong. The manager grew more frustrated as the day wore on. By noon, the situation had worsened, with even more contracts cancelled. The general manager looked pale, overwhelmed by the chaos. Even with everything going on, I wanted to give a final farewell speech, so I approached the manager, but he brushed me off, saying, I'm not in the mood for this right now, let's do this later. So, I turned to say goodbye to my coworkers. As I greeted them, I could still hear the manager's frustrated voice echoing through the office. Are you in touch with them? If we get more cancellations, the losses will be huge. Don't you realize the first people to be let go will be the ones under you? He shouted. I've been trying to reach them since this morning, one of my colleagues replied. Then go directly to their office and apologize, he snapped. You're useless, that's why you can't get promoted. If you're responsible, act like it. That's a bit harsh, the employee said, attempting to defend themselves. What's that? You're talking back? Only do that after you've solved the problem, he shot back. The general manager kept scolding his team, moving from one person to the next. A surprising goodbye. With all the chaos in the office, I couldn't even say proper goodbyes, so I quickly packed up my belongings and went home. Since I'd already been fired, there was no way to find out exactly why. When I told my wife about the mess at work, she laughed and said, "Oh, that company, we actually had a lot of contracts with them, but I canceled all of them." Wait, why would you do that? Was it because I got laid off? I asked, surprised. That's part of it, she replied, but honestly, I never thought highly of your company. The salespeople were polite at first, but when I visited, I always felt they were just putting on a show. So, you canceled all the contracts? I asked, still processing it. Yes, I thought it was a good chance to let them go. It turns out my wife is the chairman of a holding company that runs several popular restaurants. Her company had contracts with my company, but she didn't think well of them and used this chance to cut ties. I couldn't hide my surprise, but in a way, I felt relieved. It's unfortunate you had to leave like this, but let's enjoy life now, she said. I agree, it's a bit sooner than I planned, but I'm ready to relax. Yes, you've worked so hard all these years, she added, smiling. Now I can spend more time with you. I'm actually stepping down as chairman myself, and I've already chosen my successor. Despite being laid off, I felt lucky. After 29 years at the company, I had saved enough, and now we were both ready to take life easy. With our early retirements, we began enjoying our days together, free from the stresses of work.
In the quiet residential area of Greenwich, Connecticut, among the neatly lined white colonial-style houses, Catherine's cheerful voice could be heard drifting from the second-floor window of the Brown residence, just like any other day. Today, I'll be sharing the recipe for my favorite lemon tart. Catherine Brown, 29, was the owner of Kathy's Kitchen, a cooking YouTube channel with 50,000 subscribers, and a freelance web designer. Her smile in front of the camera had always captivated her viewers. However, recently, her posting frequency had noticeably decreased. Catherine was 5 months pregnant. Her morning sickness was getting worse by the day, and even the slight smell from her beloved Sub-Zero refrigerator was enough to trigger severe nausea. "I'm sorry, I'm not feeling well again today." As Catherine apologized to her viewers through the screen, they responded with kind words. Comments like, "Don't push yourself," and "The baby comes first," flooded the screen. Her husband David was away on another business trip. At 34, he served as a research and development manager at a biotech company in Boston, spending half of each month away from home. This serious and hard-working husband had met Catherine at a social media marketing seminar 3 years ago, where they fell into a fateful romance. Now in their second year of marriage, they were eagerly awaiting their new arrival. However, a shadow was creeping into their happy daily life. A year ago, David's mother had moved in with them. It all started with the sudden death of David's father, George, 2 years prior. On the surface, he had been known as a philanthropist and former executive at a pharmaceutical company. But after his death, a 35-year history of domestic violence and massive debts from company embezzlement came to light. To repay the debts, David's mother Eleanor had to end her teaching career and give up the house she had lived in for over 30 years. "Let's have mother live with us." David's suggestion came from a place of kindness. However, no one could have predicted that this decision would expose the family's underlying tensions. Eleanor Brown, 62, had been a victim of domestic violence for over 30 years while maintaining the facade of a perfect housewife. While beloved by children as an elementary school teacher, at home she would overreact to minor issues and particularly despised modern social media culture. "Catherine, those videos of yours, they're rather undignified." Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she spoke. Preparing perfect breakfasts, maintaining immaculate cleanliness, and scrambling to repay debts, her rigid posture seemed to bear the weight of years of pressure. David had been strongly influenced by his mother. Having witnessed his alcoholic father's violence since childhood, he threw himself into work as if trying to escape those memories. The Browns appeared to be a harmonious family on the surface. But in reality, they were deeply troubled. The family photo displayed in their spacious living room showed smiling faces, but behind those smiles, everyone was carrying their own burdens. From Catherine's second-floor office window, she could see the Martha Stewart-inspired garden, the perfectly manicured lawn and seasonal flower beds. The scene seemed to mirror their lives, outward beauty masking inner distortions. A quiet change had begun, unnoticed by anyone. It would soon create ripples that no one could have anticipated. Until that peaceful spring afternoon when Catherine's scream pierced the air. At 7 a.m., Greenwich was still wrapped in tranquility. Outside the window, neighborhood housewives were enjoying their early morning jogs and starting their elegant days with Starbucks morning coffee. In stark contrast to this everyday scene, tension was already brewing inside the Brown residence. Catherine woke up with severe nausea. Her steps were heavier than usual as she rushed to the bathroom. David was away on a 2-week business trip. He had been on the phone late last night, preparing for a research presentation in Boston. As she wiped her mouth with a towel, she found herself missing her husband's voice. "Are you all right? Breakfast is ready." Eleanor's voice echoed from downstairs. Having finished preparing a perfect breakfast, her mother-in-law was already standing in the kitchen wearing an apron. Crispy bacon, scrambled eggs, and freshly baked croissants. The aroma of American breakfast wafted throughout the house. The smell made Catherine's stomach churn even more violently. "I'm sorry. I don't think I can eat this morning." Eleanor's hands froze for a moment at Catherine's words. A shadow fell across the perfectly arranged tableware. The high-end Williams-Sonoma dining set had been Eleanor's wedding gift to them. "I see, wasting food again." After this brief response, Eleanor silently began clearing away one person's portion. Her back seemed to harbor an ominous portent of the tragedy to come. During the morning, Catherine lay in bed checking work emails on her smartphone. A web design deadline was approaching. However, just looking at the computer screen made her eyes strain. "Why don't you rest?" Eleanor's voice, bringing lunch, seemed kind at first glance. However, her eyes were cold, appraising Catherine like merchandise. "Thank you, but I'm fine." Catherine returned a smile and quietly closed her bedroom door. Around 4 p.m., Catherine forced herself to get up. It was time for her regular, Kathy's Kitchen, broadcast. Realizing she couldn't manage filming the new recipe she had planned, she decided to do an apology live stream from her bed. "Hello everyone. I'm so sorry, but I'm not feeling well today." As Catherine explained her condition to viewers on her smartphone, concerned comments began flooding in. "Take care, we'll watch when you're better." Such warm words brought her some comfort. That's when it happened. Suddenly, her bedroom door burst open. "You useless thing. Get up right now." Eleanor stood there, still holding a hot iron. Her usually perfect hair and makeup were disheveled. Her eyes held an eerie light. With the dark hallway as her backdrop, her figure appeared like an ominous shadow puppet. "I'm not feeling well." Catherine's voice trembled with fear. The live stream screen was being flooded with surprised and concerned comments. "Shut up. I won't tolerate such a lazy daughter-in-law. You can't even handle housework or childcare properly, but you're always on social media. Shameless." Eleanor's screams echoed through the room. Her hand with the iron slowly moved toward Catherine. Bluish steam was still rising from the iron. "Stop." Catherine's scream rang out. But Eleanor didn't stop. The hot iron pressed against Catherine's right arm. Intense pain and the smell of burning. Comments like, "Call the police. Someone report this," continued to flow on the smartphone screen. "It hurts. The baby, the baby." At Catherine's scream, Eleanor's movement stopped for a moment. A flicker of confusion crossed her eyes. Perhaps the word baby had stirred something within her. But soon, her eyes regained their coldness. Liar. Lazy good-for-nothing. You're just like him. Eleanor's voice was shaking. Him referred to her late husband, George. It was as if the memories of 35 years of violence were resurging within her. Her eyes were no longer seeing reality. She was likely seeing a scene overlapped with phantoms from the past. 5 minutes later, sirens approached. Someone in the neighborhood must have called after hearing the screams. Several residents had already gathered at the front door. Beyond the whitewood fence, people could be seen watching the situation, smartphones in hand. The gardening club members, usually exchanging only peaceful greetings, were now wrapped in unusual tension. Police! Open up! At that voice, Eleanor's expression changed. The iron fell to the floor with a loud clang. The strange light had vanished from her eyes. Instead, they now held bottomless fear. George, forgive me. Eleanor's body crumpled. In that moment, you could see 35 years' worth of masks shattering. Perfect housewife, ideal mother, respected teacher. All the masks were crumbling with a sound. Catherine, despite her pain, continued gripping her smartphone. On screen, witnessed by tens of thousands of viewers, a new family tragedy was being broadcast in real time. Everyone knew. From this day forward, the Brown family would change dramatically. And the chain of violence that had been hidden for so many years had finally surfaced. The sound of sirens echoed again through the quiet suburban streets of Greenwich. This time it was an ambulance. As the ambulance sirens faded into the distance, several police cars and local news vans were already parked in front of the Brown residence. An unusual commotion spread through the quiet residential area in the early evening. Mrs. Catherine Brown. Let me check the condition of your burn. The paramedic carefully examined Catherine's arm. Fortunately, the burn was relatively minor. However, the medical staff's expressions were grave at the fact of assault against a pregnant woman. We recommend hospital examination to check the baby's condition. Catherine nodded silently. Beside her, a police officer was reviewing the smartphone footage. The live stream was already beginning to spread rapidly across social media. The hashtag #SaveCathy was trending in no time. Meanwhile, Eleanor was being questioned by the police. Sitting on the luxury sofa in the living room, she had shrunk into herself, looking like a different person entirely. For 35 years. I endured it all. A young female officer listened quietly to her trembling voice. In this perfectly maintained house, the long-hidden history of violence was slowly coming to light. My husband did the same to me. Eleanor's confession came in fragments. Rolling up the sleeve of her brand-name cardigan revealed faint traces of old burns. Marks of violence inflicted by her husband George 35 years ago. Why didn't you tell anyone? I was ashamed. I couldn't tell anyone. As a teacher, as a mother, as a wife. I had to be perfect. At 8 p.m., David returned home in an emergency. He had interrupted his research presentation to come back. His expression, having rushed straight from the airport, showed a mix of confusion and anger. Why did this happen? David shouted as soon as he entered. His voice was filled more with anger than sadness. "Why did you do a live stream? Exposing our family's shame." At first, he tried to defend his mother. The suffering of his mother he had witnessed since childhood, his father's violence, and his own inability to do anything. That guilt was clouding his judgment. "David, that's not it." Though Catherine desperately tried to explain, her husband's anger wouldn't subside. "You must share some responsibility." Pushing mother to this point. At that moment, a police officer quietly intervened. "We have footage of the assault on your wife. This is clearly a crime." At the calm voice, David's expression froze. The footage on the smartphone. His mother's screams. His wife's cries. And in the background, comments from tens of thousands of viewers. Reality was slowly taking shape in his mind. "Let's get counseling." At Catherine's quiet suggestion, the room fell into silence. Late that night, the three sat on the living room sofa. Cold coffee on the table. Smiling family photos on the wall. The scene now looked painfully empty. Local news had already begun breaking coverage of the incident. DV incident against notable cooking YouTuber. Social media visualizes cycle of violence. Headlines danced across the screen. Eleanor silently watched the television. The madness from earlier was gone from her eyes. Instead, they held deep exhaustion and resignation. "I'm sorry." It wasn't clear who her apology was directed to. Outside the window, several police cars were still standing by. And beyond the whitewood fence, neighbors stood watching the situation, smartphones in hand. Social media continued broadcasting this quiet suburban tragedy to the world. The next morning, Greenwich was wrapped in unusual tension. At 6 a.m., before dawn at the Brown residence. The kitchen, where perfect breakfast preparations would normally be underway, was dominated by an unnatural silence. Although Eleanor had woken at her usual time, she couldn't bring herself to get out of bed. Our top story today: the domestic violence incident against cooking YouTuber Catherine Brown. Eleanor caught her breath at the sight of herself on the TV screen. Her usually perfect hair, makeup, expression, everything looked maniacal. The live stream had recorded her rampage in detail. "Is that me?" Looking at her face in the mirror, Eleanor touched her cheek with trembling hands. She hadn't slept at all last night. Her memories were fragmentary, the boundary between reality and nightmare blurred. Then, the doorbell rang. "Mrs. Brown, ABC News. Could we discuss yesterday's incident?" "Eleanor, could you tell us about your 35 years as a DV victim?" As reporters pressed in one after another, Eleanor's body began to shake slightly. It was the precursor to a panic attack. In the second-floor bedroom, Catherine woke to her smartphone's notification sound. Kathy's Kitchen had surpassed 100,000 subscribers overnight. The comments section was overflowing with words of encouragement, and messages of empathy from DV survivors were pouring in. "We've had the same experience. Your courage has saved so many of us. Speaking up is the beginning of change." Catherine read through the comments while wiping away tears. Her arm burn was minor, and there was no concern for the baby's well-being. However, the emotional wounds wouldn't heal so easily. Meanwhile, David had shut himself in his home office. On his desk lay a mountain of documents from the police. His father George Brown's past was slowly coming to light. Multiple hospital emergency transport records. Eleanor's history of fractures, burns, bruises. All diagnoses recorded with obviously unnatural explanations like fell downstairs or iron accident. Why didn't I notice? David's hands trembled. Childhood memories were coming back in fragments. Late-night screams. His mother's crying. His father's roars. And he had hidden under the bed, covering his ears. Since back then, all this time. The police investigation extended into George's past as well. The embezzlement at the pharmaceutical company. History of alcoholism treatment. Behind his reputation as a philanthropist, he had continued inflicting violence for years. And the most shocking discovery was Eleanor's diary. Found deep in the basement in an old trunk, it was a record of 35 years of suffering. Written in perfect handwriting, the diary recorded an unimaginable history of violence hidden behind a facade of happiness. April 15, 1989. Today again, with the iron. But tomorrow is Parents' Day. I must get through it with a smile. December 24, 1995. Christmas Eve, yet again. In front of David. Can't let my son see. Must hide these wounds. Tomorrow, I'll prepare a perfect dinner. January 10, 2020. George collapsed. They say it's a heart attack. Is this the end? But the debts. David's face turned pale as he read through the diary. It contained truths he hadn't known, or perhaps hadn't wanted to know, recorded in detail. At 10 a.m., the police press conference began. This case appears to have a background of generational domestic violence. Regarding suspect Eleanor Brown, who was both victim and perpetrator, we plan to proceed with expert psychological evaluation. As camera flashes from reporters lit up the room, the chief investigator continued quietly. Simultaneously, we will investigate the 35-year history of DV by the late George Brown. Additionally, this incident, visualized through social media, may lead to uncovering other potential DV cases. These words would be reported across America. The incident in quiet suburban Greenwich had become a symbol illuminating the deep darkness lurking in modern society. In the afternoon, a woman visited Catherine's hospital room. "Hello, I'm Sarah Johnson. I run a support group for DV survivors." A gentle smiling middle-aged woman. She held a brochure in her hand. "We've seen many people like Eleanor. Perpetrators who were also victims. If you're willing, would you share your experience with other victims?" Catherine nodded silently. Then she picked up her smartphone. The Kathy's Kitchen live stream was still saved on screen. If my experience can give someone hope. Outside the window, spring sunlight poured down. Greenwich was going about its usual daily routine. However, from this day forward, something had definitely begun to change. A small but certain step toward breaking the cycle of violence was about to begin. 1 week after the incident, in the counseling room at Greenwich General Hospital, Eleanor quietly began to speak. "My life has been 35 years of being forced to be perfect." Dr. Anderson, the therapist, listened silently, nodding as the afternoon sunlight through the window gently illuminated Eleanor's tired face. From the beginning of our marriage, George demanded perfection from me. Meals had to be served hot. The house had to be perfectly organized. That was the standard. Taking a shaky sip of water, Eleanor continued. The first violence came 3 months after our wedding. When I was late with the ironing, and his shirt had wrinkles. He took the hot iron and... Her words trailed off. The pain from 35 years ago seemed to still be etched in her body. But the next day, he went to work as if nothing had happened. He was the kind of man who received awards for charity work. I thought no one would believe me. Catherine and David watched this confession from the adjacent room. Through the one-way mirror, they observed Eleanor's figure. I never knew. David's voice trembled. Childhood memories now returned with new meaning. On nights when Dad came home late, Mom always waited with a hot meal ready. Even though she must have been tired, she wore a perfect smile. Catherine quietly took her husband's hand. The gesture seemed to ease some of David's tension. The counseling was bringing profound changes to all three of them. Eleanor had started attending DV survivors group therapy. Meeting women with similar experiences gave her a new perspective. Maybe I never needed to be perfect. As she spoke these words in group therapy, the tension that had long marked her expression was gradually fading. Meanwhile, Catherine had begun a new challenge on her YouTube channel. Today, I'd like to talk about something different. She smiled gently at the camera. Her morning sickness had settled, and the little life inside her was growing steadily. Domestic violence isn't just an issue in certain families. If our experience can give someone hope. Kathy's Kitchen was gradually transforming into a channel that shared not just recipes, but also the family's healing process. Messages of empathy and encouragement from viewers never ceased. David, too, was making significant changes. I've decided to reduce my business trips. He announced this at a family meeting one night. He had requested a transfer from research to management. I want to prioritize time with my family. I've been looking away for too long. But not anymore. Eleanor quietly shed tears at her son's decision. Then she turned to Catherine. I'm sorry. For that day, and for everything before. Catherine nodded gently at her heartfelt apology. Mom, let's build a new kind of family together. The three sat around the table sharing a warm dinner. A real family scene, not striving for perfection but embracing their true selves. Outside the window, the spring twilight gently enveloped the town. Greenwich's streets maintained their usual tranquility. But something had definitely changed. In the Brown family kitchen, there were no more demands for perfect meals or tense atmosphere. Instead, there was growing trust and new bonds being nurtured. Eleanor now attended DV support group meetings every Wednesday, sometimes sharing her own experiences. Catherine continued broadcasting, sharing both easy recipes for expectant mothers and the family's recovery process. And David was exploring a new family dynamic while reassessing his work-life balance. Shall we all cook dinner together today? The family responded with smiles to Catherine's suggestion. Though a bit awkward, warm moments were beginning to flow. The cycle of violence was definitely breaking there. A new kind of family was slowly but surely taking shape, one that didn't demand perfection, didn't hide wounds, and could ask for help when needed. The setting sun cast gentle light through the Brown family's windows, its rays warmly blending the figures of the three people together. They weren't a perfect family. But that was okay. Healing wounds, deepening understanding, and moving forward step by step, this was the new path they had chosen. In the kitchen, where morning sunlight streamed through the window, I tugged down the sleeve of my long-sleeved shirt a little further. This unconscious gesture has been part of my routine for 7 years now, a small habit to hide the burn scars on my left arm. But these days, it's just become part of my daily life. Mommy, look. My 5-year-old son Jacob pointed to his new drawing placed next to his breakfast pancakes. The picture, drawn during his favorite playtime at kindergarten, showed our family of 3 holding hands. The sky was blue, the sun was smiling, and the lawn in front of our house was colored in vibrant green. "That's beautiful, Jacob," I said, gently stroking his soft hair. Our home is in a quiet residential area in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas. The streets are well maintained, and the neighbors' lawns are meticulously kept. The 2-story White House was purchased in David's 7th year as a sales manager at a real estate development company. He's a kind and understanding husband who values our family above all else. Though we barely see each other on weekdays, he leaves early and returns late. I understand it's necessary to support our lifestyle. On weekends, he always makes time for us, taking family trips to the park or having barbecues. When I see his smile during these times, I feel that normal life I chose 7 years ago wasn't a mistake. 7 years ago, I was seeking a new life, trying to escape my past in New York. When I met David at a mutual friend's house party, I felt my heart healing through his sincere personality. I told him I used to work as an office worker. That wasn't a lie. But I haven't told anyone everything about my past yet. Those memories remain sealed deep in my heart, about that day, and the reason for these scars on my arm. This was my choice, a normal life, ordinary happiness. Even while carrying my past, I'm grateful for each new morning. I still remember Elizabeth's expression when David and I decided to get married. I sensed something cold beneath her superficial smile. That hasn't changed. She's a well-regarded figure who has volunteered with the local animal protection organization for over 20 years. She always plays a central role in community meetings and actively participates in charitable activities. But whenever she visits our house, her perfectionist nature becomes apparent. From how to organize the kitchen to how to clean the living room, her criticisms are endless. We especially clash over Jacob's upbringing, every single time. "Ashley, this food is too bland. If you spoil Jacob like this, he'll have problems in the future. David, you need to be more firm." Such words are thrown at us like casual greetings. David is strongly influenced by his mother's words. I can feel him caught between his mother and me. But he never shows it openly. He just holds me a little tighter when we lay our heads on our pillows at night. I understand that's his way of apologizing and expressing his love. Jacob is particularly afraid of large dogs. He's been scared of them ever since a big neighborhood dog barked at him when he was little. I understand his feelings and encourage him to get used to them gradually. We sometimes visit the zoo or small pet shops, starting with smaller animals and working our way up to larger ones. But Elizabeth is different. Her thinking is always rigid and unforgiving. It's pathetic for a boy to be afraid of dogs. David could play with any animal when he was little. If you raise him like this, he'll have problems in the future. Jacob shrinks at his grandmother's words. Each time, I hug him and whisper, "It's not shameful to be afraid." But even those words become targets for Elizabeth's criticism. In her eyes, everything about my parenting seems wrong. We have a small vegetable garden in our backyard. On weekends, I tend to the vegetables with my son. While touching the soil, Jacob slowly regains his confidence. Jacob, who loves to draw, captures the growth of these vegetables in his pictures: the bright red tomatoes, the vivid green cucumbers, the yellow blossoms of the zucchini. Our refrigerator is covered with his drawings. Elizabeth calls it cluttered, but to me, they're precious records of my son's growth, my most treasured possessions. On a mild spring day, I gaze out the kitchen window into the garden. The life I chose 7 years ago was indeed my ideal, normal life. Making breakfast, taking care of my son, waiting for my husband to return home. Such ordinary days mean everything to me. While still carrying a past I can't tell anyone about, I must continue to protect my family. That is my mission, and my happiness. Outside the window, maple trees sway in the spring breeze. Their young leaves sparkle in the light, announcing the beginning of a new season. One morning, in the soft spring sunlight streaming through the window, I was preparing breakfast with Jacob in the kitchen. The scent of maple syrup filled the room as pancake batter slowly rose on the griddle. On the white plates from the cupboard, I arranged blueberries in a smiling face pattern, as always, our morning ritual that Jacob loves. "Mommy, what's for dessert in my lunch today?" Jacob asked, hugging my waist. His small body in checkered pajamas should have been getting in the way of my kitchen work, but this gesture always warms my heart. "Well." As I answered, opening the refrigerator, I saw the chocolate chip cookies we'd baked yesterday lined up inside. We had made them together over the weekend. I can still picture his serious expression as he tried to shape the cookies perfectly, despite being covered in flour. David left earlier than usual this morning. He had an important business meeting. Dressed in his navy suit, looking more tense than usual, he said, "I'll be late tonight." "Sorry," and gently patted the still sleepy Jacob's head before leaving. When I saw him off at the door, his back seemed a little smaller than usual. While going through my morning routine, I found myself checking the sleeves of my long-sleeved shirt repeatedly. This might be more of an obsession than a habit. I unconsciously make sure the scars on my left arm are hidden. In the backyard visible through the kitchen window, the vegetables, moistened by yesterday's rain, were gleaming with fresh greenness. Just as I was about to start getting Jacob ready for kindergarten after breakfast, the phone rang. I dried my hands from washing dishes and checked the display to see a familiar name. Elizabeth. I hesitated for a moment before answering my mother-in-law's call. "Good morning, Ashley. I'm thinking of stopping by today." I was momentarily lost for words at this sudden announcement. Her typically forceful voice came through the receiver. "Actually, I have a dog I've been fostering for 2 weeks. I'd like you to see how the training is going. I could hear her usual pushiness in her voice. Or was it my imagination that I detected something different in her tone today? But Elizabeth, I have to take Jacob to and from kindergarten today. My excuse-like protest was immediately cut off. It's fine. I'll come before noon. We'll finish before you need to pick up Jacob. Her way of leaving no room for refusal was typical. But there seemed to be an unusual level of fixation in her voice today. In the end, I had to agree. After hanging up, an inexplicable anxiety crossed my mind. Though this was nothing unusual, today felt especially unsettling. As if to shake off these feelings, I adjusted the sleeves of my long-sleeved shirt. Outside the window, the trees swaying in the spring breeze seemed to cast ominous shadows on the ground. After dropping Jacob off at kindergarten and finishing the house cleaning, the intercom rang. Looking at the clock, it was 11:30. My steps toward the front door felt a bit heavier than usual. When I opened the door, there stood Elizabeth. Her pastel pink two-piece suit was her typical proper attire. And beside her, my eyes widened. There was a pit bull, larger than I had imagined, secured with a strong collar. Its muscular build and sharp gaze created an overwhelming presence. An unmistakable tension emanated from the dog's body. What do you think? Impressive, isn't he? Elizabeth said proudly, gazing at the dog. There was an unnatural excitement in her voice. Well, come in. I carefully chose my words as I guided them to the living room. Or rather, Elizabeth had already entered with the dog before I could finish. Her footsteps seemed to echo louder than usual. I found this one at the shelter. He was very guarded at first, but now he's become so obedient. Elizabeth continued proudly. But I could see an unusual tension in the dog's eyes. Its restless gaze around the room seemed to be waiting for some signal. As time passed and Jacob's pickup time approached, the living room clock seemed to move unusually slowly. Just as I was about to say, "It's time," I heard the front door open. "Mommy, I'm home." The usual cheerful voice. But it froze the moment he entered the living room. Jacob coming home by himself. My heart leaped. I just remembered, today had a different schedule because of field trip preparations. My son stood frozen in place. I could see his small body begin to tremble as he spotted the large pit bull. His picture book bag was rattling audibly. "Mommy, I'm scared." Jacob's trembling voice called out to me for help. Large tears welled up in his eyes. Just as I was about to stand up. Crying over a dog. How pathetic. Elizabeth's cold voice echoed through the room. Her expression showed clear contempt. Her eyes were like those of a predatory bird eyeing its prey. "Elizabeth, stop." My voice was trembling too. An alarm was ringing in my mind. But my mother-in-law wouldn't listen. "Raising such a coward, your parenting is a failure." As she said this, Elizabeth deliberately reached for the pit bull's collar. There was a coldness in her eyes I'd never seen before, as if years of hatred had suddenly surfaced. And in the next moment, before my scream could reach them, Elizabeth removed the collar. The pit bull, the moment it was released, took a step toward Jacob. there was clear intent in its movement. At that moment, Elizabeth's expression changed. Her smile vanished, and her face turned pale. As if she had just realized the gravity of what she'd done. Or as if she had seen something unexpected. In that instant, something switched on inside me. The memories I had sealed away for 7 years rushed through my body all at once. The training in New York. The time spent with countless dogs. And that day of flames and screams. Everything came back vividly. The touch of my hands, the smell in the air, and the cryptic command words that still echoed in my ears. My vision suddenly sharpened. The old training took over my body as if it were yesterday. At that moment, I was no longer Ashley the housewife. Halt! Down! My voice rang through the room, sharp and unlike anything they'd heard before. Nothing like the gentle voice I usually used with Jacob. The pit bull's movement stopped for a moment at that voice. Its muscular body tensed, showing a moment's hesitation in its aggressive stance. I followed with an even stronger command, specialized instruction words. Words that would only work on dogs trained for this kind of aggressive conditioning. Commands like secret codes unknown to normally trained dogs. Code red, neutralize. The pit bull's body tensed for a moment, then surprisingly obediently took a submissive position. The aggression had vanished from its eyes. Its tail touched the ground, showing complete surrender. This response was clear evidence of specialized training. In the confusion, the sleeve of my left arm had rolled up. Deep burn scars snaked along my arm like a winding river, the price I paid trying to rescue my partner dog from a collapsing building that day. The reddish scars remained vivid even after 7 years, etching that day's memories into my flesh. The blood drained from Elizabeth's face. Her wandering eyes were fixed on this unfamiliar version of me that had suddenly appeared. Could it be? Her eyes darted between the scars on my arm and the perfectly controlled dog. Her expression mixed confusion at an unexpected situation with the fear of something crumbling away. Yes, I was a K-9 unit trainer. My quiet voice carried the dignity of my former profession. No need to hide anymore. This is the real me. The other self I had sealed away for 7 years. Elizabeth frantically tried to grab her cell phone, but it slipped from her trembling hands. The screen of the device lit up as it hit the floor with a loud clatter. A video was playing on the screen. My heart froze at what was displayed. Multiple pit bulls receiving specialized training in a dimly lit place. My eyes immediately recognized the methods. This wasn't normal training. It was a record of calculated, cruel training designed to maximize aggression. The date and location were recorded at the edge of the screen. Footage from just a week ago. Location, an abandoned building in the suburbs. Everything had been planned. This pit bull, it's no rescue dog, is it? I quietly approached the dog and checked its neck. There were traces of specialized training equipment. To a professional eye, the evidence was clear. The regular scarring was unmistakably from illegal training devices. Picking up the fallen phone, I found several similar videos saved in the gallery. Dates, locations, even the tools used, everything was meticulously recorded. Evidence of calculated preparation. And all of it had targeted my son. With each scroll through the screen, my anger deepened. Why go this far? At my question, Elizabeth's expression twisted. Her eyes no longer showed any sign of reason. For my son. David should have been raised stronger. Her voice was hollow, as if echoing from a distant past. It mixed twisted obsession with madness. True, David was too kind. Too obedient to what I said. But that. Her eyes seemed to look at something far away each time her words trailed off. So you decided to hurt your grandson the same way? My voice shook. I couldn't tell if it was anger or sadness welling up inside me. Behind me, Jacob was still trembling slightly. That trembling strengthened my resolve even more. Rather than being raised by a weak person. Elizabeth's eyes became fixed. She no longer resembled the mother-in-law we knew. It was as if a long-worn mask had fallen away, revealing someone else entirely. You stole David. My precious son. Her voice dripped with obsession and hatred she had harbored for years. Each word was filled with twisted love and desire for control. You ruined all my perfect education. Kindness is nothing but weakness. Strength is the only way to survive in this world. Elizabeth spoke as if spitting out the words. Her appearance was pitiful enough to evoke sympathy. Just then, sounds came from outside the window. Neighbors were beginning to gather, drawn by the dog's commotion. Worried voices, camera phone flashes. I took out my phone and dialed 911 without hesitation. The moment Elizabeth moved toward the door, Jacob hid firmly behind me. I could feel his small body trembling against my back. But the trembling was gradually subsiding. Perhaps my son had sensed the strength within me. Don't move. My voice had regained the authority from my training days. It was both a command and a warning. 20 years of animal protection activities. What were you plotting behind your mask of a well-regarded citizen? While maintaining a public face, behind the scenes, such cruel training. Elizabeth's expression twisted further at my questioning. David is my son. I raised him, my. Her words broke off as tears began flowing from her eyes. At the end of madness born from possessiveness and obsession, she stood frozen. The sound of sirens could be heard in the distance. The voices of neighbors grew louder around the house. There was no escape now. All truth was about to be exposed to the light of day. It's okay now, Jacob. I spoke gently to my son behind me. Mommy will protect you. No one will hurt you anymore. At these words, I felt my son's trembling gradually subside. At that moment, I felt years of burden slowly lifting. No need to hide anymore. My past, these scars on my arm, everything would become strength to protect my son. The memories I had sealed away for 7 years were beginning to take on new meaning. The police sirens drew closer. Elizabeth slowly collapsed onto the sofa, as if finally understanding everything. It was the moment when the perfect mask she had maintained for years shattered completely. Spring sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the pit bull now lying quietly. While this incident was drawing to a close, a new chapter for our family was about to begin. The time had finally come to tell the truth. Police cars arrived one after another. The first officers on the scene quickly assessed the situation. "Here's the evidence phone," I said as I handed over the device. "The videos have dates and locations recorded. They're evidence of illegal training." Elizabeth remained silent, staring ahead with empty eyes. She only let out a slight sigh when the officer handcuffed her. The mask of the perfect, upstanding citizen had crumbled completely. Neighbors began offering their testimonies one after another. "We've been hearing dogs barking late at night recently. I saw suspicious activity at that abandoned building. Her behavior at the Animal Protection Organization had been strange lately." As the investigation progressed, more shocking facts came to light. During her 20 years of work with the Animal Protection Organization, there had been numerous suspicious incidents: missing dogs, unnaturally injured animals, and multiple buried accusations. The trial began 2 weeks later. The court will now deliver its verdict for the defendant, Elizabeth Carter. I held David's hand tightly as the judge's voice echoed through the courtroom. "For the crimes of animal cruelty, attempted assault, and related charges, I sentence you to 5 years in prison." Elizabeth never looked our way, not even once. Just before boarding the transport vehicle, she finally choked out a word. "I'm sorry." Those words were tinged with regret. That night, when I heard the front door open, my heart leaped. "I'm home." David's voice was heavy with deep fatigue. "Welcome home." My voice trembled too. I quietly sat down next to David on the living room sofa. "Tell me everything." His voice was gentle, but his eyes held deep sadness. I began to talk about my days as a K-9 trainer in New York, the rescue operations during 9/11, the burns I got trying to save my partner dog from a collapsing building, and how I sought a normal life to escape that trauma. "I'm sorry for hiding it." Tears spilled from my eyes. "But when I met you, I learned what true happiness was. These 7 years were never a lie." David remained silent for a long time. Then, slowly, he took my left arm and rolled up the sleeve. His fingers traced the burn scars gently. "You had a past you couldn't tell even me." His voice trembled. "And about Mom. I'm sorry. I should have noticed. It's not your fault." I shook my head firmly. "Elizabeth was just drowning in her twisted love for you. Mom, she'll be entering a rehabilitation program in prison." David quietly informed me. "She'll be learning how to interact with animals from scratch." "I see." We shared a long silence. "But we can never go back to a normal relationship with Mother." David's voice carried strong determination. "I'll protect our family. Even after she's released, we'll keep our distance." That night, we talked until dawn. About the past, the present, and the future. Feelings we couldn't put into words gradually took shape. "Hey, David." I spoke up just before dawn. "That pit bull. I want to take care of him." He looked surprised but soon showed a gentle smile. "What about Jacob? Will he be okay?" "With time. I'm sure he will," I said, gazing out the window. "That dog has a wounded soul too. We have a duty to heal him." A few months later, on a holiday, there was an unprecedented peace in our backyard. "Mommy, look. Max did it. He gave me his paw." Jacob's voice was full of excitement. Max, the pit bull who had completed rehabilitation, sat in front of him, wagging his tail. I had started training rescued dogs again. This time, to help traumatized dogs recover through love. On weekends, David and Jacob help too. Sometimes, letters arrive from Elizabeth. Her days in the rehabilitation program, her feelings of regret, and her determination to make amends. David reads them silently and quietly puts them away. The wounds haven't healed yet. But we'll have to gradually accept that as part of our history. "Dad, can I take Max for a walk?" "Of course. But remember what Mom taught you." David answered while patting his son's head. "I know, I can do it right." "Right, Max?" My eyes welled up watching Jacob talk to the dog. Fear gradually transformed into trust. Wounded hearts heal with love. This applies to both dogs and humans. "Mom." Jacob, finished playing, pointed to the scars on my arm. "These are like a hero's medals, aren't they?" My eyes met David's. His eyes were moist with tears too. "Yes," I answered, hugging my son. "These are proof that I protected precious lives." The family's laughter echoes in the twilight garden. Max seems to be smiling too. In everyone's eyes now, he's no longer a dangerous dog. Just a precious member of our family. The spring breeze blows through, announcing the arrival of a new season. Our story of accepting the past and looking toward the future begins again from here. Both Elizabeth's rehabilitation and our healing will surely be a long journey. But we had the courage to take that first step.
I spoke with police here, and they said that he legally has the right to record anything he wants. However, I am sure I have some right to privacy. When the police visited my neighbor regarding the camera, my neighbor did move the camera ever so slightly toward the street. Now, a month later, the camera is directly pointing into my bedroom window again. My home is about 50 feet away from his. It is clear that this is where it is recording. He has also threatened me when I have asked personally to move the camera, and he replied with my house, my rules, as well as a mention of a recording of me calling him the N-word. I didn't on said camera. I just want it pointed away from my bedroom window. I'm sure he can hear what goes on in the bedroom as well. What are my options? Am I allowed to put up a board on my property, blocking the camera view from my window? Honestly, that's about all I have left in the tank. Update 1. So a ton has happened since I last posted. I had mentioned in the comments that my neighbor had been basically using sound terrorism to harass us. I began a writing in a log of each event that occurred. With the time, the date, the description, if I called the police I did for almost every one, and it began to show an alarming pattern. He was playing sounds at random times of the night every single night. After each major event of sounds, I would drop off a written statement to my local police station for the code enforcement officer. The city was now looking at charging him for noise violations based on my complaints. I took my 3-page log and copies of 7 signed statements and finally had enough of the police taking their time to work on the case against my neighbor. I dropped $95 on paperwork to begin an anti-harassment order against my neighbor. I made sure to explicitly mention the camera pointed in my bedroom window and the ongoing noises. He was served a temporary order that very day by the local police, and sure enough, the noises ramped up. Before our court date to discuss the anti-harassment order, we were subpoenaed to be witnesses for the noise violation. We also brought the former owner of the home as well as the person who lived on the other side of my neighbor as witnesses to his noise-making capabilities. My neighbor never showed to the court date, and at that point had $1,250 pending in tickets. His lawyer showed up an hour late, and the judge graciously accepted his plea to move the date a month forward. Disappointment. Then the date for the anti-harassment order came. Once again, my neighbor didn't show, and his lawyer begged for more time to look over the case. The judge was just and said that everyone has a right to defend their First Amendment rights, so he moved the court date for a month later as well. Disappointment number 2. The noises are continuing on the regular at this point, and we are trying to record them as best as we can on our phones. It was really hard to do because the noises were short and happened at random in the middle of the night. The date for the second anti-harassment arrived, and finally, we saw our neighbor come through the courtroom and sit in the back. When it was our turn to explain the situation, we made sure to present our call log, our statements and videos that we had as evidence against our neighbor. Our neighbor's lawyer tried to get us to give up the call log because he mentioned he was not aware of it before our court date. The judge basically told the lawyer to go fuck himself. The lawyer's only defense for my neighbor was that he worked long hours and couldn't possibly be awake in the middle of the night to terrorize us, and that conversely, we were the ones making the noises. We then brought up the fact that our neighbor had a security camera pointed directly at our home, and he should have plenty of evidence to prove we were indeed the noisemakers. The judge very confidently approved our anti-harassment order, stating no more noises, no more cameras in our windows or at us in general, and our neighbor is not allowed within 25 feet of us. He immediately moved the camera pointing in our bedroom window to being completely flush with the side of the house. Awesome. This was great news. We finally achieved some peace. And then the date for the noise violation trial came, just as lawyer showed up and made a deal with the city lawyer that one ticket would be paid in exchange for no appeal to our anti-harassment order and to throw out 2 tickets. It sucked, but they took the deal. Whatever. And all seemed well. Then, about a month after the anti-harassment order kicked in, the noises began, again, and the camera began to slowly point into our garage, back in the direction toward the bedroom window. This time, the police noticed something more alarming. A red light was going off in the tinted window directly below the camera on the outside of my neighbor's house. They shone their flashlight and spotted a lens. My neighbor had a camera inside his window pointed at my bedroom window the entire time the order was in place, and long before that. The officers told us to stay quiet. Don't be alarmed, but they now were actively seeking a search warrant for the property to seize any noise-making equipment and to take down the cameras as he had broken the order. The next weekend, my neighbor was arrested and we got to sit outside on the front porch while they disassembled the cameras and seized speaker after speaker, megaphones, etc. from my neighbor's home. They said he had 4 foot of insulation surrounding the room with the camera, and the front door of the home was completely barred shut. Unfortunately, they just seized the equipment and will eventually give it back. My neighbor was out of jail the next day, and since they didn't have a search warrant for his hard drives, they couldn't place any voyeurism charges, despite my insistence. They even mentioned they saw me and my husband on a laptop of his. I'm just happy that the noises have stopped, and as far as I know, no more hidden cameras. I'm just glad I could update this crazy situation for you guys. I'm sure I'm not out of the woods yet. Update T. It's close to a year now that we've dealt with the worst of my neighbor. Almost a year ago, we achieved the success of having an anti-harassment order granted. That summer, he was arrested for harassing us, and he stopped with the cameras and the noises. But something was brewing behind those closed doors. Around early November 2017, we had a knock on the door one evening. It was an officer asking if we had heard gunshots in the area. We had not. Soon into our conversation, he mentioned it was our neighbor who called and complained. They were aware of the situation and assured us that despite the situation, they have to respond to all gunshot calls. I was honestly not surprised that after all the quiet, something started up again. The next day, a police cruiser parked across the street from our home. I was expecting someone to knock again and ask about gunshots. No one came to the door, and the officer sat across the street watching my home for over an hour. The next day, I emailed an officer I had been working with previously regarding the situation. The officer told me that my neighbor had been calling 911 every single day on my address for gunshots. By the time I got an email back, it had been a week. Every single day. This man was coming home from work, eating dinner, tending to daily life and calling 911 on us for shooting guns. The officer said he would look into seeing if this counted as harassment through a third party. The new year came and went, and in early January, I emailed the officer back, and his response was simply that the city prosecutor wanted to set up a phone conference to discuss the plan going forward. The city prosecutor mentioned to me that at that point in time, my neighbor had still been calling 900 every day, even the morning of the conference call. She said they contacted all of my other neighbors to see if they heard any gunshots and asked if they would testify that they have not heard anything come from our property. They also planned to charge my neighbor with some counts of harassment and wrongfully utilizing emergency services. Part of his deal with the arrest over the summer involved him able to avoid jail time by having good behavior, and they are looking for their time back essentially. His arraignment date came, and his pretrial was set. Came and went. It's being continued until next month. I am worried that he will try to continue this case until the end of time. Our anti-harassment order expires soon, and we will have to drag him to court once again to renew it and spend more money. Things are starting to feel pretty dim again, and honestly, the recent continuance knocked the wind out of my sails. All I can do until I am called as a witness victim is wait. Update 3. Remember how I said that the city prosecutor was all on board to help me finish this? Well, things have changed. The second pretrial after the case was continued is coming up. I contacted the prosecutor to ask why the case was continued. Apparently, the prosecutor went on an extended leave of absence and gave the case to another prosecutor. Okay, no big deal. I was given the contact of the new prosecutor and emailed them to check for an update. No response. 2 weeks have gone by, and 2 emails were sent with no response from the prosecutor. I even contacted the prosecutor's assistant, and no one has gotten back to me. Dead silence. To say that I am disappointed is an understatement. I don't know what to do, because the original prosecutor was so gung-ho about finishing this case, and now I can't get a hold of anyone. This is so uncommon, because when I had questions before, usually I would get a phone call with an answer, and at least an email response. My neighbor keeps adding trash cans to the fence line. These are large, heavy-duty cans with lids. I really don't know what it's about, but it's making me extremely uneasy. This whole situation is seriously giving me anxiety, and I just want it to be over. Radio silence from the only people who are trying to help me is making things so much worse. What should I do? Update 4. So it's all over. The prosecutor called me and said, of course, they aren't wanting to plead guilty to all the charges, and instead of jail time, his attorney wants 30 days of house arrest, which is what he does already, just sits in his house and never leaves. The trial was pushed to July, and we are moving out of state around that time. I told the prosecutor that we wouldn't be here to be witnesses. I have no soul left or fight in me. Thanks for all your help, everyone. The justice system has failed us. Update 5. Hello all. Thanks for listening and following this ridiculous thread of events. My neighbor pled guilty to 19 counts using emergency services inappropriately, and 1 other charge they won't explain. He cannot talk to me or my husband, and cannot bother anyone on this property, ever. He is also required to have a mental health evaluation, which he was supposed to go do on his own when this started rolling. The result of breaking any of these rules will hopefully be jail time. Now is the new dilemma. He was outside today, looking at our brand new for sale sign on the house. Not kidding, and maybe this is just paranoia, but my realtor called and said someone had scheduled an appointment to view the home this evening at 6 p.m. We haven't told him about the situation, because honestly we thought nothing was going to come out of this, and we had lost. Now the new people that will be moving in when we sell are protected, but we figured to let sleeping dogs lie, and let our neighbor be the first one to mess things up. We were put in the same situation with the last owner of the home, and it isn't illegal in WA to not disclose these things. I think my neighbor is trying to tour my home. I have no problem with him wanting to buy the home, but I am not interested in him snooping. I know my realtor will be monitoring him, but a part of me is wondering if he will be trying to take photos of my stuff, etc. I have partially lost my mind even considering that man will be in our home. What can I do? My husband was thinking about parking down the street when the appointment time was, and making sure, I suggested a nanny cam, both of which are probably insane to do. I am afraid that telling my realtor will also result in a nightmare. It It wasn't my neighbor that toured the home, thank God. But now we have a Nest camera set up, so we will know. Update 6. So my neighbor decided to throw up some nice floodlights pointed over his fence right at our bedroom window, right after his court date. In that time, we have sold the home and moved to an apartment and transitioned to our new destination, far, far away. He turned on the floodlights every night at 10 p.m., and they would clearly shine through the bedroom window, even with the blackout film, and really shone through our guest bedroom, where my mom stayed for a week to visit. Police came out and took pics and drove by several nights to confirm they were still up. Part of his plea deal is to not commit similar incidences and further harass us. This comes into play later. I called the police, and they ended up serving me papers saying I was required to be a witness in court. Court day came, they were asking for jail time, and my neighbor's attorney asked for a continuance because he didn't have time to review the new info. They granted it. Second week comes around, we rescheduled for a special hearing with a pro-team judge. Mistake. Today was the hearing, and the second time we all had to take off work to show up. The judge immediately told the city prosecutor, since she didn't have a formal briefing, that he was not familiar with the case and that it would not be heard today. Typically, the judge who does hear the city's cases is well informed, and the prosecutor objected to this, saying it is not a requirement. You knew what was on the docket today. The judge further mentioned that because specific charges were not filed and they were just asking for jail time given back onto the jail time they waived at the previous hearing. He wasn't interested in doing this today. He read the plea deal and said that similar incidences is too vague and should be thrown out, and he didn't know how shining lights on our property was similar to whatever he got in trouble for in the first place. Then he mentioned he had court in Seattle in 2 hours and wasn't interested in hearing my testimony today. Also, since we will be gone by October, he didn't see the issue in why we were even there. Since we moved, we can't be harassed anymore, so problem solved. I broke down in tears of sheer frustration. The prosecutor said I don't have to be a witness anymore, and they would talk to the usual judge in the case, and to keep in touch with her. When my neighbor walked out, he did a very dramatic prayer hands in the air, like he knew he won. I give up again. We're leaving. It's over. I will never get my day in court. I will never know what I did to this man to make him harass me so deeply. I will never get 2 years of my life back. I hate it. The only good thing out of this is the police report that we got after they raided his home last summer. Dude's a weirdo sexual deviant, even in the eyes of a very liberal and accepting Washingtonian.
I'm Hannah Collins, 34 years old, working as a part-time music teacher 3 days a week in a quiet residential neighborhood in Tampa, Florida. When I open my front door, the penetrating evening light streams into our Spanish-style home. My son Tommy's sneakers are carelessly left on the doormat. Tommy, please arrange your shoes properly. As if in response to my voice, my 8-year-old son comes running down from the second floor. His soft hair bounces as he moves, and his large brown eyes sparkle brightly. Sorry, Mom. Tommy apologizes sincerely and carefully arranges his shoes with his small hands. His pure gesture makes me smile involuntarily. Tommy is a sensitive and intuitive child. His caring and gentle nature must come from his father. I met my husband Daniel 6 years ago at a mutual friend's wedding. He works as a middle manager at a local technology company. When we first met at the wedding, I was instantly drawn to his sincere personality. His neatly groomed black hair and gentle smile, but most of all, his natural consideration for others. We decided to get married just a year after meeting. I'm home. At 6 p.m., Daniel returns home at his usual time. His return marks the beginning of our family's precious daily routine. In the living room, Tommy starts working on his homework, while I put the finishing touches on dinner preparation. The savory aroma of grilled vegetables wafts from the kitchen. Is that grilled chicken? Smells wonderful. Daniel hugs me from behind. Even with fatigue visible on his face from work, his love for his family remains unchanged. However, lately I've been worried about the faint dark circles under his eyes. He seems to be under some stress after being passed over for a promotion. Hannah, my mother's coming tomorrow, Daniel mentions during dinner. His mother Eleanor has been visiting us frequently since she lost her husband 2 years ago. She maintains an outwardly refined demeanor, but her occasional fixation on money concerns me. Perhaps financial anxiety weighs heavily on her as she lives on her pension. Will Grandma look at my drawings again? Tommy asks excitedly. True, my mother-in-law is good at praising her grandson's artwork. But lately, I've noticed something anxious in Tommy's expression, especially before and after her visits. Oh, and Sarah's coming too. At the mention of my sister-in-law's name, I become lost in thought. Sarah is an influencer with about 50,000 followers on social media. Behind her flashy posts, I sense she might be dealing with some issues. Recently, she's been visiting our house more frequently. On weekends, we go on family picnics or watch new releases at the local theater. On the surface, we might seem like an ideal middle-class family. We live in a house with a pool in the backyard in the Hyde Park district. Our 2-car garage houses my compact SUV and Daniel's sedan. Sunday brunch barbecues in the backyard have become our tradition. But invisible shadows are creeping in. After father-in-law's death, a heavy atmosphere has settled over the Collins family. Daniel's behavior has been changing gradually too. I've been noticing the bluish glow of his computer more often late at night. As a music teacher, I have a good reputation among students and parents. Working 3 days a week was perfect for balancing family time. So when Daniel recently asked, "Have you considered switching to full-time?" I felt a bit confused. But what concerned me more was Tommy's change. Despite his typically bright and energetic personality, lately he sometimes shows a distant expression. He starts to say something, then closes his mouth. This gesture tugs at my heart. In our air-conditioned home, while cleaning up after dinner, I think. Life with my beloved family. Ordinary but genuine happiness. Yet beneath this daily life, some unseen darkness lurks. That premonition might have been a harbinger of the fate about to strike us. That portrait arrived at our home one Friday evening. It was past 7 p.m., later than usual, when Daniel stood at the entrance holding a large frame in both hands. Sweat beaded on his neck, and he had an unusually tense expression. A business contact gave it to me. They say it's a really valuable antique. The portrait illuminated by the entrance light showed what appeared to be a 19th-century nobleman. A middle-aged man in a navy dress coat, wearing a cold smile beneath his well-groomed mustache. Don't you think it would be perfect on the living room's main wall? Daniel spoke with unusual enthusiasm. True, the painting might suit our cream-colored walls. But why suddenly bring home such an old-fashioned portrait? Questions crossed my mind, but considering his recent behavior, I thought perhaps he needed a change of pace. Dad, that painting. Tommy, coming down from upstairs, stopped in his tracks when he saw the portrait. His usually cheerful voice disappeared, and he fell silent after starting to say something. What do you think, Tommy? Isn't it nice? To Daniel's question, Tommy just nodded vaguely. That night, my son unusually barely touched his dinner. From the next day, the atmosphere in our house began to change gradually. the first thing I noticed was Tommy's change. He started avoiding the living room whether doing homework or watching TV. He insisted on studying at the dining table, and even when I suggested, "Isn't it brighter over there?" he would just shake his head. Then one night, "Mom, I need to go to the bathroom." Around midnight, Tommy knocked on my bedroom door. His small voice was trembling, and I jumped up immediately. "What's wrong? Are you feeling sick?" "No, it's just going through the living room." While gently patting Tommy's head as he looked down anxiously, I accompanied him to the bathroom. Both going and coming back, he wouldn't even glance toward the living room. The next day, a decisive event occurred. At 3 p.m., Tommy unusually started his homework on the living room sofa after returning from school. Just as I felt relieved thinking, "That's good, he's finally getting used to it," we heard the sound of a pencil dropping. "Mom." When I turned around, Tommy's face had turned pale. His small body was slightly trembling as he stared fixedly at the portrait. "That painting, it feels like it's watching us, it's scary." His confession in a trembling voice sent chills down my spine. But faced with my anxious son, I forced a smile. "Oh, that's just your imagination. It's only a painting." Though I brushed it off lightly, from that night, I started noticing things too. When I got up for water in the kitchen late at night, I thought I heard a faint mechanical sound. Like a camera shutter. As if to deny it was just imagination, the atmosphere in our house steadily changed. Eleanor and Sarah's visits suddenly increased. What particularly caught my attention was how they always had long conversations in the living room, stopping in front of the portrait as if checking something. "Hey, Mom, shouldn't we adjust the angle of this painting?" When Sarah reached for the portrait saying this, Eleanor hastily stopped her. "Oh, it's fine as it is. The lighting is just right." When I heard this conversation, something felt off. It was as if they were concerned about something other than the painting itself. Conversations in the house decreased. Daniel always went out to the terrace to take work calls, and Sarah never let go of her smartphone during visits. Even Eleanor's praise for her grandson's drawings started to sound hollow. And that mechanical sound at night. What I first thought was my imagination became increasingly clear. Especially in the quiet of night, from the direction of the portrait. But it would take a little more time before I realized what it really was. The mechanical sounds at night became more noticeable day by day. As if to prove that what I initially thought was my imagination actually existed. Especially when I could hear it clearly from the direction of the portrait in the middle of the night, it sent chills down my spine. Without telling my husband, I reported it to the police's cybercrime division. Surprisingly, the officer took my story seriously. We've been paying special attention lately to unusual behavior in security cameras and smart home devices. 3 days later, the police's special cybercrime investigation team visited our home. The technical team carefully scanned the entire living room with their equipment. When they stopped in front of the portrait, their detector showed a sharp response. "We're detecting the latest wireless network. May we examine this portrait?" Behind the carefully removed portrait, the police discovered a small camera system. The high-performance wireless camera was connected to our Wi-Fi and had been transmitting encrypted video to overseas servers. This is a very sophisticated system. Professional-level setup. With the technical team's report, the investigation progressed rapidly. IP address tracking identified the streaming site's operator. What was revealed was shocking beyond my imagination. 24 Hours with the Ideal Family. That was the name of the stream that had been selling our family's privacy. On a subscription-based streaming site, about 300,000 people worldwide had been watching. A portion of the monthly fees became revenue, about $8,000 per month. When I learned this fact, everything went black before my eyes. As the investigation continued, a deeper darkness emerged. It had all started with my father-in-law who passed away 2 years ago. An old ledger discovered during a police search of Eleanor's home revealed the whole story. After retirement, my father-in-law had gotten involved in real estate investment. However, most were illegal investment schemes, and after repeated failures, he had accumulated about $500,000 in debt. Moreover, loans from loan sharks had outrageous annual interest rates of 20%, and his days were spent struggling with repayment. Then his sudden death. With life insurance unpaid, only the enormous debt remained, and its pressure had driven the whole family into a corner. Furthermore, it was revealed that Daniel had been experiencing serious workplace harassment at his company. After missing out on promotion, perhaps from desperation, he tried personal investments but failed. He had accumulated new debt of $150,000, impossible to repay with just his salary. Sarah's situation was also serious. Her income as an influencer had rapidly decreased, and major brand contracts were suddenly terminated. Credit card payments fell behind, and her debt had grown to $80,000. Eleanor was also cornered. Her pension alone couldn't sustain her lifestyle, and she was struggling to pay increasing medical bills. She was even at risk of losing the house she had lived in for many years. That's when they came up with this streaming plan. The streaming site's management screen was found on Daniel's computer, revealing he had handled everything from camera installation to streaming system setup using advanced technology. Sarah's social media accounts contained numerous records of secret promotion to followers worldwide. Most shocking was the meticulous revenue record found at Eleanor's home. How to distribute the monthly revenue, how much to allocate to debt repayment. Like a household account book, it recorded in detail the profits from selling our lives. Why involve Tommy too? To my question, Sarah confessed tearfully. That's what viewers wanted. The image of a perfect family. They said it had no value unless we showed everything, 24/7, 365 days. At that moment, something completely broke inside me. Even my son's changing clothes and bath time. Even our bedroom privacy. All trust and love for family shattered. The footage had been streamed worldwide, exposed to the eyes of 300,000 strangers. All for just $8,000 a month. Our dignity had been trampled by family members blinded by money. In a small conference room at the police station, I was shown the footage. The large monitor displayed our family's daily life. In the footage, edited like a documentary, we had unknowingly been made to play the role of a perfect family. Breakfast time. A scene where Tommy spills cereal and I gently wipe it up. An afternoon holiday, the family enjoying board games. Although these were supposed to be our natural life moments, the footage cut for unknown viewers, consumption, somehow looked distorted. This is As I lost words, the footage continued. Scenes of Tommy changing after returning from school. Innocent water play during bath time. As chills ran down my spine, the police officer continued explaining quietly. These videos were specially edited and distributed to paid members. At that moment, the conference room door opened, and Daniel, Sarah, and Eleanor were brought in accompanied by police officers. Their expressions showed something like resignation, as if they had given up. Why? To my question, Daniel was the first to speak. To repay the debts. We had no other choice. Those words sounded like hollow echoes from far away. Everyone yearns for the ideal family, Sarah continued. We just showed them that dream. What's wrong with providing what many people want? Eleanor also spoke quietly but with unwavering voice. It was either this or bankruptcy for the whole family. You wouldn't understand what it's like being chased by debt collectors every day. Those words definitively broke something inside me. You're right, I don't understand. Why you would ruin my son's life for money. How you could so easily sell our privacy. My voice gradually grew louder. Tommy is only 8 years old. How do you think he'll feel when he learns about this in the future? What if his school friends find out? What if he learns as an adult that footage of his childhood was spread worldwide? As the air in the conference room froze, I stood up. We are not a spectacle. With that cry, my hand reached for the portrait placed among the evidence on the table. I lifted the heavy frame and slammed it to the floor with all my strength. From the frame that shattered with a loud noise, an emotionless camera lens looked up at me. The sight seemed to symbolize the true nature of the family that had been deceiving us. Over the next few weeks, legal proceedings moved forward rapidly. Daniel, Eleanor, and Sarah were arrested on charges of child privacy violation and illegal video distribution. I immediately initiated divorce proceedings and filed for sole custody of Tommy. Meetings with lawyers continued almost daily. There was more than enough evidence, and compensation claims were certain to be approved. But money was secondary. All I needed now was to start a new life with just Tommy and me. Mom, are we moving? While packing boxes, Tommy asked anxiously. Leaving Tampa for another city in Florida. I had decided we would start living somewhere new, unknown to anyone. Yes, we're starting a new life in a new place. Will anyone be watching us like at the old house? At that question, I stopped packing and held Tommy tightly. Never. I promise. 3 months into our new life in a new city. The school where I had been working part-time welcomed me as a full-time teacher. Though busy with 5-day full-time work, it's fulfilling. Above all, the time spent with students seems to be gradually healing my emotional wounds. Our new home is on the 2nd floor of an old apartment building. No pool in the yard, no 2-car garage. But in this compact space, I feel a definite sense of security. No surveillance cameras, no smart home systems. Just a quiet life where only Tommy's and my breathing can be heard. Mom, look. On a holiday afternoon, Tommy showed me a picture he drew at school. A landscape painted in bright colors. A big sun in the sky, colorful flowers on the ground. And 2 figures holding hands. This is me and Mom. Tommy's face showed an innocent smile I hadn't seen in a while. Seeing that smile makes my heart warm. This is our new normal. A truly free life, unseen by anyone. What a beautiful picture. I smiled along with Tommy. Looking at my son's picture hung on the wall, I vowed in my heart that we would continue walking together, step by step. Never again would our lives be sold for someone else's desires. In this small home, we're building genuine happiness. Perhaps this is the form of a perfect family that money can never buy. Cherry Creek North, an upscale neighborhood in Denver, lay wrapped in morning mist. On a quiet street lined with luxurious mansions stood a house that showcased modern architectural beauty. Mary Brown stood by the large window of her home office, gazing at the distant Rocky Mountains. The soft pink morning sun gently colored the snow-capped peaks. She took a sip of her organic blend coffee and sat down at her latest iMac. 2 days until the deadline. She murmured to herself as she immersed herself in designing a new catalog for a high-end sportswear brand. At 36, Mary possessed an intellectual beauty that belied her age and was Denver's most sought-after freelance graphic designer. Her natural makeup and simple yet high-quality cashmere dress enhanced her sophisticated air. The office interior reflected her designer's eye, with Scandinavian furniture harmoniously blending with modern art. "Honey, I think I'll be home early today." A message arrived from her husband Richard around noon. He was a sharp professional, Denver's premier commercial real estate broker handling deals worth millions. Tall and handsome, always impeccably dressed in luxury suits, he was the epitome of success. Mary had met him 3 years ago while working on a condominium brochure design. After a whirlwind romance that seemed straight out of a movie, they held a lavish wedding with 500 guests that became the talk of Denver. "Mary, dear." At 3 p.m., she received a call from her mother-in-law, Elizabeth. A woman of refined beauty, Elizabeth had once owned a chain of luxury boutiques and still reigned as a social elite. Since losing her husband 5 years ago, she had been living an elegant retired life in her grand mansion in the Denver suburbs. "You're coming to the country club event this weekend, aren't you?" Her mother-in-law always exuded an intimidating presence with her perfect fashion sense and bearing. Though outwardly polite, Mary sometimes found it hard to read Elizabeth's true feelings beneath the surface. At dusk, Richard returned home early as planned. His luxury BMW X7 glided onto the white gravel driveway. "I'm home, Mary." Her husband strode through the door looking like he'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Mary felt renewed gratitude for the unexpectedly happy life she'd found in 3 years of marriage. This enviable lifestyle, ideal marriage, and secure position in high society. However, Mary had no way of knowing that this perfect daily life was about to crumble in a terrifying way. At 6 a.m., Mary woke up as usual. Richard was breathing quietly beside her in bed. She got up carefully to avoid making noise and changed into her latest Lululemon yoga wear. In the kitchen, she made a green smoothie using organic vegetables and fruits from Whole Foods. Using nutrient-rich ingredients was Mary's morning ritual. After 30 minutes of stretching in the glass-walled home gym, the rosy morning sun had begun to illuminate the Rocky Mountain ridgeline. "Good morning." Richard appeared in a perfectly pressed Armani suit after his shower. While brewing coffee for her husband, Mary confirmed today's schedule. I have an online meeting with the LA client at 10. I have 3 property viewings. Should be back by evening. Their breakfast time together was brief, but it was their comfortable daily routine. After Richard left for work, Mary began her work in the home office. Bathed in natural light from the large windows, she immersed herself in advertising design work on her latest Mac. Her work was highly regarded, and she received constant requests from Denver's top companies. For lunch, she met her friend Jennifer at Cherry Creek Shopping Center. Jennifer worked in real estate and was a longtime friend introduced by Richard. "Mary, are the preparations for Elizabeth's birthday party going well?" "Yes, though I haven't heard many details yet." The two enjoyed a light lunch at a newly opened bistro while gossiping about the latest high society news. In the afternoon, she returned to work and handled video conferences with clients. In the evening, she received a call from Richard. "I'll be coming home with Mother today. We have something important to discuss." Mary was a bit surprised but quickly prepared for dinner. When Elizabeth visited, she had to prepare dishes to her taste. It was like an unwritten rule. At 7 p.m., Richard and Elizabeth arrived. Elizabeth was dressed, as always, in an elegant Chanel suit. "Mary, what a lovely fragrance." The dining room was filled with the fresh scent of lavender. Mary knew her mother-in-law's preferences. "Actually, I have a wonderful plan," Elizabeth began while sipping wine. "To celebrate my 70th birthday, let's go on a hiking trip, just the 3 of us." Richard has agreed. "Hiking?" Mary couldn't hide her surprise at the unexpected suggestion. Elizabeth wasn't known to be outdoorsy. "Yes. We'll go to Deer Creek Canyon Park. The scenery is perfect this time of year." Elizabeth's expression was unusually soft. "The mountains are beautiful in early summer, aren't they?" Richard was enthusiastic too. "It'll be good for you to take a break from work and refresh." Mary agreed, pressed by their enthusiasm. Indeed, a trip with the 3 of them might be a good opportunity to deepen their relationship. That night, before bed, Mary was checking online for new hiking gear. Richard was already breathing steadily in bed. Outside the window, Denver's night lights twinkled quietly. As Mary savored the happiness of this peaceful daily life, she felt a vague anticipation for the upcoming family trip. At that moment, she couldn't have imagined that this trip would change her life forever. At 4:30 a.m., Mary woke up before the alarm clock rang. The sky visible from the bedroom window was still dark, with stars shining crisp and clear. In bed, she thought about the strange dream she'd had last night. Standing on a cliff. But she couldn't remember what happened next. "Ready?" Richard appeared in his newly purchased North Face hiking wear after his shower. Mary nodded silently and changed into the same brand's outfit. In the kitchen, she packed the light meals and drinks she'd prepared the day before into a waterproof bag. Organic energy bars, trail mix, and hot tea in an insulated flask. Everything had been chosen with Elizabeth's preferences in mind. "The weather forecast looks fine." While checking the weather information displayed on the Apple TV in the living room, Mary also picked up her camera bag. The latest mirrorless camera was a Christmas present from Richard last year. At 5 o'clock sharp, Elizabeth arrived right on schedule. "Good morning, Mary." Elizabeth was surprisingly casual in her appearance. Instead of her usual elegant designer brands, she wore functional outdoor wear. However, her bearing remained as graceful as ever. "Everything's ready. It's going to be a wonderful day." There was something different in Elizabeth's voice. Mary felt a moment of unease but didn't dwell on it. The car left the quiet early morning streets of Denver and headed west on I-70. The street lights gradually became fewer, and they eventually entered a dark mountain road. The car was quiet, with Richard and Elizabeth occasionally speaking in low voices. "We're here." When they arrived at the Deer Creek Canyon Park parking lot, the sky had just begun to brighten. Only 3 cars were in the parking lot, and the surroundings were silent. In the distance, an American crow could be heard calling. The temperature is lower than expected. As Elizabeth said, the air at around 2,000 meters elevation was cold, their breath visible in white puffs. Mary put on the fleece jacket she had prepared. "The route is this way." Richard led the way while checking his map app. The well-maintained mountain path climbed at a gentle gradient. Tall ponderosa pines lined both sides, filling the air with a fresh pine scent. Taking several breaks along the way, the 3 walked on quietly. Occasionally, Elizabeth would stop to take landscape photos. However, there was less of their usual social conversation, and a strange tension seemed to hang in the air. "This is the scenic point." After about 2 hours of walking, they reached their destination. Below stretched the Denver cityscape, wrapped in morning mist. The view from the steep cliff was truly breathtaking. "Let's take a break." At Elizabeth's suggestion, they sat down a little way from the cliff. Mary poured tea from the flask and offered it to Elizabeth. At that moment, Richard moved several meters away to check his mobile phone. The wind grew stronger. Mary's long hair covered her face as she unconsciously moved closer to the cliff edge to look at the view. That's when she faintly heard a conversation behind her. "The insurance procedures are all taken care of, right?" Elizabeth's voice. Gone was its usual elegance, replaced by a cold tone. "Yes, I increased it 3 months ago. If we make it look like an accident, it'll be perfect." Richard's response sent a chill down Mary's spine. She seems to have noticed something recently. "It has to be today." In that instant, Mary understood everything. Her husband's unnaturally kind behavior lately, her mother-in-law's sudden trip suggestion, and the meaning of last night's dream. By the time she tried to turn around, it was already too late. A strong force pushed her from behind, and Mary's body went over the cliff edge. In her final moment before falling, she saw their cold expressions. Richard's emotionless gaze. Elizabeth's satisfied smile. Time seemed to stop. The sound of cutting through the wind. The rustling of trees. Her own scream. Then, a violent impact. Though the trees somewhat cushioned her fall, Mary's consciousness gradually faded. As sirens began to sound in the distance, only one thought swirled in her mind. "I will survive, no matter what." When consciousness returned, the first thing she noticed was the smell of disinfectant. A private room at UC Health University of Colorado Hospital. Soft sunlight streamed through the large windows, gently illuminating the predominantly white interior. Abstract paintings hung on the walls, giving the room an almost luxury hotel-like atmosphere. Mary gritted her teeth against the pain that enveloped her entire body. The memory of what happened before she lost consciousness stabbed at her mind like a sharp blade. Her husband and mother-in-law's conspiracy. The fall from the cliff. And those cold expressions. As the door to the hospital room slowly opened, Mary immediately closed her eyes. Still not awake. Elizabeth's voice. Her usual dignified tone had returned. The doctor said she should regain consciousness soon. Next, Richard's footsteps approached. His leather shoes made faint sounds on the expensive flooring. "Are you sure this is okay?" Richard's voice carried feigned concern. Mary continued to breathe regularly, as if in deep sleep. The breathing technique she had learned from her mother, who had worked as a nurse, was now proving useful in an unexpected situation. "Oh," she moved. Elizabeth raised her voice as if noticing something. Mary decided to slowly open her eyes. The first thing she saw was the two of them standing by her bedside. Elizabeth was dressed in a top-tier designer suit, and Richard was immaculate in a navy Armani suit. Like stage actors playing the roles of family members distraught over an accident. "Mary! Thank goodness!" Richard showed an expression of relief as he tried to take Mary's hand. Though she felt an instinctive urge to avoid it, she remained passive with a vacant expression. "Do you remember anything before the accident?" In response to Elizabeth's question, Mary shook her head. The gesture was calculated to convey confusion and anxiety. "Why am I here?" She made her voice tremble as she pretended to have lost her memory. "You slipped while hiking," Richard began to explain. "You fell from the cliff. We were so worried." Mary felt nauseous at the false kindness in his words. But she didn't let it show on her face. "Miraculously, there don't seem to be any serious injuries," Elizabeth explained as if playing the role of a doctor. "But you'll need to rest for a while." At that moment, the real doctor entered the room. The middle-aged doctor with graying hair approached Mary with a gentle expression. "Mrs. Brown, how are you feeling?" My head is. It's normal for memories to be unclear. Temporary memory confusion often occurs due to the impact of bruising." The doctor continued explaining Mary's condition, mixing in medical terminology. Full body bruising, mild concussion, and the need for a week of observation. "Thanks to your family's dedicated care, we can expect a smooth recovery." At those words, Mary inwardly smiled bitterly. The very people who had injured her were now playing the role of caregivers. She felt a quiet anger at this ironic situation. Rehabilitation can be done at home. However, someone needs to be with you at all times. Elizabeth immediately responded to the doctor's words. "Of course, we'll take turns staying with her." Mary felt a new fear at the sight of Elizabeth playing the perfect mother-in-law. Home recovery might give them another opportunity. But Mary's face showed nothing. She just stared blankly at the ceiling. At that moment, one decision had solidified within her. To perfect this act and continue playing the role of memory loss until she could gather definitive evidence. That was her only path to survival. Outside the window, Colorado's blue sky stretched out. That blue reminded her of happier days past. But now, Mary's heart was filled with a cold flame of revenge. 1 week after discharge, Mary sat on her living room sofa with her MacBook open. On the surface, she was playing the role of a patient slowly recovering from memory loss. However, the screen displayed records of real estate transactions and bank transfer histories. Richard was at work, and Elizabeth was out for social engagements. The two had been taking turns checking on her, but today was unusually quiet with no one around. So this is it. Mary furrowed her brow at the transaction records displayed on the screen. A large-scale real estate development project that Richard had handled 3 years ago. Behind this seemingly successful project, massive debt had been hidden. In the silence broken only by the sound of typing, she gathered evidence one piece at a time. The life insurance policy that had been substantially increased 3 months before the accident. Traces of loan shark collections. And suspicious transfer records to Elizabeth's bank account. $3 million. When the total amount of Richard's debt became clear, Mary maintained an icy calm. An amount far exceeding her annual income as a designer. It explained why he had thought to kill her. She had already obtained security camera footage. Images of the two having a long discussion at Elizabeth's home early on the morning of the accident. And social media posts from hikers who had captured the incident on the mountain. The unnatural positioning of the 3 people visible in the distance completely contradicted the explanation of an accidental fall. "Ma'am, it's time for your medicine." Maria, the housekeeper, entered the living room at the scheduled time. Mary quickly closed her laptop and returned to playing the role of the obedient patient. "Thank you, Maria." The trembling of her hand as she accepted the medicine was also part of the act. After Maria left, Mary discreetly disposed of the pills in the glass. Her investigation of the medicine had revealed that it contained drugs that affected memory. In the evening, Richard returned home. "How are you feeling?" "Getting better, little by little." While smiling at her husband, Mary was thinking. Tomorrow, everything would be ready to submit all the evidence to the police. An anonymous tip had also been arranged. That night, after Richard had fallen asleep in the bedroom, Mary quietly made her way to the study. She had already confirmed the safe's combination while pretending to be unconscious in the hospital, catching it from Richard's phone screen. The stack of documents that came out contained decisive evidence of Elizabeth and Richard's conspiracy. Insurance fraud plans, fabricated accident explanations, and numerous documents with her forged signature. The next morning, when Elizabeth came to check on her as scheduled, everything came to an end. The doorbell rang, and the police arrived. Elizabeth was shocked, and Richard rushed home from work. The elegant masks fell from both their faces. "I never lost my memory for a moment." Mary's cold voice echoed through the silent living room. "I clearly remember your conversation just before you pushed me off the cliff." "This is ridiculous," Richard shouted. "There can't be any evidence. Everything was recorded." Mary produced the small recorder she had hidden in her clothes on the day of the hike. "No way." The color drained from Elizabeth's face. "This recorder is waterproof. It recorded your conversation along with my fall." The police calmly began reading them their rights. Police sirens broke the morning quiet of the upscale neighborhood. Outside the window, the beautiful Rocky Mountains gleamed as always. Mary felt a deep sigh escape as she sensed the beginning of a new life. It was over. All the false masks had fallen away on this morning. Denver was about to greet a new day. 1 year later in Denver. In her new design studio in Cherry Creek, Mary opened the newspaper while basking in the morning sun streaming through the large windows. Real estate tycoon Richard Brown sentenced to 25 years for attempted murder. Accomplice Elizabeth's 20-year sentence confirmed. She quietly closed the newspaper. The trial had dragged on longer than expected, but all the evidence had been accepted, and the two had received appropriate sentences. Stacks of new project proposals covered her desk. After the incident, Mary's reputation had grown even stronger. Her strength as a survivor had become its own brand in the creative world. "Your client has arrived," came the message from reception. Today she had a meeting with a new client. Outside the window, the Rocky Mountains stood unchanged. The place that had once brought her to the brink of death, Mary now saw with different eyes. That cliff had become the place that heralded the beginning of her new life. On her desk sat a photo of Mary smiling with her parents from her hometown. After the incident, she had started spending weekends at her family home in Minnesota. She was rediscovering the warmth of her true family. "Well, shall we begin?" Mary straightened her back and prepared to welcome her new client. There was no more hesitation in her eyes. She was certain that her life ahead was full of new possibilities. The city of Denver continued moving forward. And she too was taking a new step. In the bright sunshine, Mary's new story was quietly beginning. To anyone looking from the outside, my life appeared perfect. As the youngest chief growth officer at a major Silicon Valley tech company, every day brought exciting new challenges. My mornings were spent in passionate discussions about new projects with our brilliant team members from around the world, while my evenings were occupied with client dinners at upscale restaurants. It was an environment where I could fully utilize the knowledge and experience I'd gained from my Stanford MBA. I'm Rachel Morgan, 32 years old. I thought I was one of the lucky women who could chase her dreams under the bright California sun. Life had become even more precious since I started carrying this little life inside me. I'm 5 months pregnant with a girl. Sitting in my office overlooking San Francisco Bay, I would occasionally stroke my belly and think, the world you're coming into will be wonderful. I met Daniel 3 years ago at a Silicon Valley investors conference. At 35, he commanded the room while giving a presentation as the CEO of his family's asset management firm, Morgan Investment. I was instantly captivated by his intelligent and gentle nature. What started as casual conversation during a coffee break evolved into dinner at an upscale Italian restaurant that evening. Our relationship progressed as rapidly as a Silicon Valley startup. After 6 months of dating, we decided to get married. The wedding was held at a prestigious hotel overlooking San Francisco Bay. On that day, Daniel's mother, Christine Morgan, embraced me as if I were her own daughter. She was a formidable businesswoman who had grown Morgan Investment as CEO since losing her husband 10 years ago. At first, everything was perfect. Daniel wholeheartedly supported my career, and I respected his work. We enjoyed an ideal newlywed life in our home in an upscale San Francisco suburb. But changes came gradually. Every weekend, we found ourselves spending time at Christine's mansion. In that estate with its vast gardens, Christine played the perfect hostess while slowly beginning to interfere in our lives. "Rachel, it's wonderful that your annual salary is $450,000. But that's more than twice what Daniel makes." Such casual remarks began to create an uncomfortable atmosphere. Christine was traditionally minded. In her world, wives should support their husbands and put family first. Her need to control Daniel often went too far. Then came the decisive turning point. The day we found out I was pregnant, I was overjoyed. The new life was supposed to deepen our bond. However, Christine's reaction was unexpected. Behind her superficial words of congratulation, her eyes were cold. From then on, our weekend family gatherings became as frigid as a frozen lake. "Are you planning to continue working during pregnancy? What will you do after giving birth? You don't understand traditional family values, do you?" Such comments kept coming my way. But what hurt the most was Daniel's change. My husband, who had once been proud of my career, gradually began to align with his mother's values. Our conversations at home grew sparse, and he even began avoiding discussions about my work. Still, I believed we could overcome this situation. At 5 months pregnant, I was exploring new ways to shape our family while nurturing the little life growing inside me. That's when Christine suddenly proposed a family trip to the Grand Canyon. At the time, my work was reaching a crucial phase. The customer prediction system using artificial intelligence that I'd been working on for years had finally come to fruition. This project had been my focus since becoming CGO, involving late-night team meetings, video conferences with engineers worldwide, and countless iterations of data analysis and improvements. All that effort was finally about to bloom. With the introduction of the new system, our customer retention rates showed remarkable improvement, and our stock price soared accordingly. The digital displays lining San Francisco's financial district glowed with green arrows showing our company's rising stock prices day after day. Silicon Valley's rising star, my name suddenly appeared on the covers of business magazines. Next to my photo, showing me in a deep blue power suit, ran the headline, "Female Leader Pioneering the Future of Technology." My social media followers quickly exceeded 200,000, and speaking requests and media interview requests flooded in daily. Messages from young women overflowed with passion and hope as they sought to forge their own paths. "You're a beacon of hope for many women, especially those struggling against traditional values." Those words from a tech media interviewer still resonate with me. Her eyes had brimmed with empathy and solidarity. However, this success only deepened the tensions at home. One weekend, while spending time at Christine's mansion as usual, she unusually asked to speak with me alone in the reception room overlooking the garden. In that space surrounded by antique furniture, only the ticking of the clock punctuated the heavy atmosphere. "Rachel, your career success is wonderful." Christine began speaking in a calm tone while elegantly lifting an expensive teacup. The soft afternoon light streaming through the window illuminated her platinum hair. "But as a Morgan family wife, don't you think there are more important things? Our family line has always valued family bonds above all else." I felt the pressure behind those words acutely. The sharp intent lurking behind her calm tone pierced my heart. "Especially now, you should be putting your baby first. I want you to understand traditional family values. In our time, family was everything. It sounded less like a suggestion and more like an order. The cold light in Christine's eyes clearly revealed her intent. Around this time, a major problem arose at Daniel's company. Morgan Investment lost a crucial client. A major pension fund they'd worked with for 20 years suddenly terminated their contract. The cause was Daniel's investment misjudgment. He had misread market trends and caused losses in the hundreds of millions of dollars. From that day on, my husband rapidly lost confidence. His gentle nature receded, and he became irritable over trivial matters. He spent more time locked in his study drinking whiskey late into the night. And proportionally, he began agreeing more with his mother's opinions. "Mother's right. You should think more about our family. The balance in our marriage has completely collapsed." One night when I came home late, my husband's eyes looked hollow and unfamiliar as he said these words. The mountain of papers on his desk and the falling stock charts on his screen told the story of his anxiety. It was in this context that the Grand Canyon trip was proposed. Christine strongly recommended a family trip for the three of us, calling it one last memory before the birth. As she spread out photo books of the Grand Canyon in her mansion's dining room, there was something unnaturally intense about her enthusiasm. "Let's strengthen our family bonds while viewing the magnificent scenery. The sunset from Eagle Point is especially spectacular. It will surely be a memory that lasts a lifetime." Contrary to these words, Christine's eyes seemed to harbor different emotions. It was a sharp gaze, like a bird of prey eyeing its target. However, this trip coincided with important work commitments. I had already scheduled a live stream product launch from the Grand Canyon. Announcing our innovative product against the backdrop of magnificent nature, it was an unparalleled opportunity for my career. A perfect chance to share a new challenge with my 200,000 followers. "Don't worry. I'll help with all the live stream preparations. I understand how important your work is." Surprisingly, Daniel showed understanding for my work. In fact, he became even kinder than usual. Making breakfast, listening intently to my work concerns, preparing smoothies, helping me get ready for work. But something felt off. It felt like the excessive kindness of someone consumed by guilt. My husband's sudden change in attitude. My mother-in-law's pushy trip proposal. And my intuition was sending warning signals. Deep down, I felt something was definitely going wrong. However, at this point, I couldn't fully grasp the gravity of the situation. On the day we departed for the Grand Canyon, I was simply preparing for what I thought was a family trip. As I folded clothes into my suitcase, I looked forward to seeing the magnificent views. Gently stroking my belly carrying our new life, my husband said, "This will surely be a wonderful memory. A trip we'll never forget." At that time, I had no way of knowing the true meaning behind those words. No way to understand the unnatural shadow in my husband's eyes or the darkness lurking in my mother-in-law's smile. Christine's private jet stood on the taxiway at fog-shrouded San Francisco International Airport. The word Morgan proudly gleamed on the white fuselage. Such thick fog. As I boarded, I felt something ominous. However, focused on preparing for the live product launch, I couldn't pay enough attention to that premonition. Smartphone, backup mobile battery, wireless microphone, and lighting equipment. I checked all the equipment repeatedly. "Don't worry, Rachel. Everything's perfect. Christine elegantly settled into a lounge chair, adjusting her expensive cashmere shawl. There was something calculated about her smile. Daniel seemed restless even on the plane. He couldn't stay seated, pacing back and forth in the lounge. He ordered whiskey repeatedly, concerning the flight attendant. "Daniel, are you all right?" When I asked, he froze for a moment. "Oh, yes, just feeling a bit sick." Despite his words, cold sweat beaded on his forehead. After about 2 hours of flight, we arrived at Flagstaff Airport in Arizona. From there, we took a chartered helicopter to the Grand Canyon. The Great Canyon glowed reddish-brown under the summer sun when viewed from above. After checking into the hotel, we headed to the observation deck. The Grand Canyon Skywalk, a horseshoe-shaped glass observation deck jutting out 4,000 feet above the ground. Dusk was approaching. It was past 6 p.m., and the sun was gradually sinking toward the western horizon. Most tourists were preparing to leave. Only a few people besides us remained on the observation deck. 30 minutes until the broadcast starts. I began my final equipment check. I turned on my smartwatch's GPS function and checked the battery level. Everything was perfect. The canyon walls, illuminated by the setting sun, gradually turned a deeper red. The wind began to strengthen, causing slight vibrations in the observation deck's glass. "Shall we begin?" The clock showed 6:30 p.m. I picked up my smartphone and started the broadcast. Heart marks began floating up on the screen as viewer numbers rapidly increased. "Good evening, everyone. Finally, it's time for our new product announcement. Along with this magnificent view, our new..." That's when it happened. "This pregnant woman is useless to this family." Christine's scream suddenly interrupted the broadcast. Her eyes were filled with a hatred I'd never seen before. "Mother-in-law. What are you?" As I turned around, Daniel's face was contorted. "Mother's right. We don't need you anymore." His voice no longer sounded like my husband's. "Daniel, you're joking, right? This is..." Before I could finish my sentence, a strong force pushed me from behind. 4 hands, Christine's and Daniel's, pushed me out at once. As I lost my balance, time seemed to slow down drastically. The deep canyon beyond the observation deck's glass. The last gleam of the setting sun. My terror-stricken face reflected in the smartphone screen. And the small life moving inside my belly. "I'm sorry." I fell into the darkness, desperately protecting my abdomen with both hands. The sound of cutting through wind. My heartbeat. The observation deck's lights growing distant. Just before impact with a rock ledge about 30 feet down, my body plunged into accumulated snow and bushes. The snow and branches cushioned the impact, preventing immediate death. However, intense pain coursed through my entire body. As consciousness began to fade, I noticed my smartphone was still live streaming. Comments of shock kept flowing across the screen, and viewer numbers had exceeded 10,000. And my smartwatch's GPS emergency alert system continued blinking regularly. In the darkness, I desperately thought about my baby. "Live, we must live." The first voice I heard as consciousness faded was that of a young woman. This is Flagstaff Emergency Command. Fall incident at Grand Canyon Skywalk. Pregnant woman in danger. As I later learned, viewers of my live stream had made emergency calls en masse. The Arizona Emergency Call Center received over 100 calls within just a few minutes. Confirmed on video. Attempted murder. Please hurry. Pregnant woman has fallen. Sending GPS location. Location is Skywalk Observation Deck. Husband and mother-in-law pushed her. Thanks to the viewer's accurate information, rescue teams arrived at the scene with remarkable speed. I regained consciousness when I heard rescue team members' voices nearby. Rachel. Can you hear me? Someone carefully examined my body surrounded by snow and bushes. A young ranger wearing a bright red helmet came into view. The baby, the baby. Those were the first words I could manage. Vital signs are stable. Fetal heartbeat confirmed. I felt slight relief at the ranger's words. The Grand Canyon National Park maintained a 24-hour rescue team. Their swift response saved both my and my baby's lives. About 20 minutes after the fall, the rescue team successfully secured my body and transferred me to a rescue stretcher. Throughout this time, my smartphone continued live streaming. Viewer numbers exceeded 50,000, and comments of concern and encouragement filled the screen. You're safe now. The helicopter is arriving. True to the ranger's words, the sound of a rescue helicopter soon approached. Its vermilion-painted body appeared in the twilight sky. I was loaded into the helicopter on the stretcher. The medical team immediately started on 4 and checked my vitals. Inside the aircraft, they used a portable ultrasound device to check the fetus's condition. Baby's heartbeat is normal. When I heard those words, tears streamed from my eyes. During the 30-minute flight to Flagstaff Medical Center, the emergency medical team continuously monitored my condition. The sunset visible through the helicopter's window no longer felt threatening, but rather like a ray of hope. Upon arrival at the hospital, I was immediately taken to the emergency treatment room. The medical team worked tirelessly to save both my and my baby's lives. It's miraculous. The snow and bushes saved your life. The attending physician's words drew sighs of relief from the nurses. By then, footage of the incident captured in the live stream had begun appearing in news reports. The hashtag #SaveRachel spread rapidly across social media, and support for me expanded nationwide. Mother and child are both safe. The hospital spokesperson's announcement was met with an outpouring of joy on social media. I spent 3 quiet days recovering in the hospital bed. I remained fully conscious, and doctors were amazed at my steady recovery. The baby is full of energy too. The attending obstetrician smiled while showing me the ultrasound screen. On the screen, the small life moved vigorously. Through the hospital room window, I could see Arizona's clear blue sky. The sound of dripping fluid and the regular beeping of monitors seemed to herald the beginning of a new life. And encouraging messages continued arriving non-stop on my smartphone. Your courage touched my heart. I want to share this story with people around the world. So glad both mother and child survived. The viewers were no longer mere spectators. They had become witnesses to my new life. Lying in bed, I reflected. While this event was certainly tragic, it also taught me about people's kindness and the preciousness of life. Above all, the presence of my child bravely living inside me became a great hope for my future life. Let's walk a new path together, I whispered softly while gently stroking my belly. The sunlight streaming through the window seemed to wrap us warmly in response. 1 week after the incident, morning news programs across America began with shocking headlines. Tech executives' miraculous survival from Grand Canyon fall, mother-in-law and husband's meticulously planned perfect crime revealed. Christine and Daniel were arrested at the airport just 2 hours after the incident. They had attempted to flee on a private jet, but their plan completely collapsed due to the decisive evidence from the live stream. The police investigation revealed their plan was extremely detailed. First, their reason for choosing the Grand Canyon. It's a dangerous area with over 70 reported accidents annually, particularly falls during selfie taking. Targeting sunset was also calculated. Fewer tourists, and visibility beginning to worsen. We found evidence that the victim's shoelaces had been cut, and an empty whiskey bottle was discovered in her bag. There was clear intent to make it appear accidental. The investigators' announcement drew murmurs from the press corps. However, their plan had fatal miscalculations. First, my live stream. They hadn't accounted for a business-related product launch broadcast in their murder plan. While they knew I posted on social media, they never expected a live broadcast watched by over 10,000 people. Second, my latest smartwatch. They hadn't anticipated the GPS location transmission and automatic fall detection alert system. The suspects couldn't predict that all evidence would be recorded as electronic data and instantly distributed. The cybercrime investigator remarked with irony. During interrogation, the truth behind the incident gradually came to light. Christine's motives were a complex tangle of emotions. First was jealousy of my success. For her, who had struggled to grow the company in a male-dominated society, the rise of a young female executive symbolizing the new era was unbearable. Furthermore, she feared losing influence over her son. My presence had begun to erode the control she had built over her son for years. And the biggest reason was concern about the company's reputation. Morgan Investment had suffered huge losses due to Daniel's investment misjudgment. She feared I would begin investigating to commit murder using her son to cover up that son's failures. The prosecutor shook his head while reading the indictment. Meanwhile, Daniel's confession was even more shocking. Fear of and dependence on my mother was at the root of everything. He tearfully confessed in the interrogation room. A distorted parent-child relationship where he had been forced to meet his mother's expectations since childhood, continually stripped of his right to self-determination. Add to that his feelings of inferiority due to my success. My wife's salary was more than double mine. People called me Rachel's husband, and my failure at work was caused by that pressure. The live stream footage that served as evidence went viral on social media. With viewer numbers exceeding 1 million, issues of domestic violence and maternity harassment became major topics of discussion across America. After recovering, I posted a short video message from my hospital bed. Everyone, my baby and I are safe. I want to turn this incident into a force for changing society. That post generated an even bigger response. A year has passed since then. I've started a new life. I safely gave birth to a baby girl and now enjoy peaceful days in a new apartment. The company warmly welcomed my return and offered an even more flexible working arrangement. And unexpectedly, I found a new mission as a women's rights activist. I became involved in launching corporate domestic violence victim support programs and began giving lectures across the country. My book, Surviving the Fall, became a bestseller within a month of publication. All royalties are donated to domestic violence victim support organizations. Christine and Daniel each received 20-year prison sentences. Ironically, their perfect crime was completely exposed by technology. Sometimes I look at photos of the Grand Canyon. That deep canyon is no longer a symbol of terror for me, but represents the beginning of a new life. Hey, Emma. Let Mama tell you something. We have the power to be reborn as many times as we need. I whisper while holding my daughter. Outside the window, a new San Francisco morning was about to begin. It must have been a scene that no mother would ever want to imagine. Until that moment when I might have lost my son Oliver, my life had been ordinary and happy by anyone's standards. I had been working as a children's librarian at the Amherst Public Library for 7 years. Since moving to this town, every morning at 8:30, I would hold Oliver's hand as we walked along the maple-lined sidewalk. Together, we would look up at the sky changing colors with the seasons, the deepening green of the trees, and the dancing fallen leaves. Mom, will you read Peter Rabbit to me again today? Oliver would always ask this when we arrived at the library. His eyes were always shining with curiosity. My 4-year-old son loves books. Watching him listen intently to my storytelling voice and sometimes hold his breath at the story's developments was my greatest joy as a mother. My husband Michael works late every day as vice president of a major investment firm. Although many holidays are spent on business trips and family time is limited, he still showed his own way of caring for the family. At least, until that day. Meeting Michael was like a scene from a movie. 5 years ago, when he stopped by the library, I approached him as a guide when he was looking for books in the economics section. I liked his clean-cut smile and sincere demeanor from the start. After that, he began visiting the library frequently, and naturally, we started spending more time together. My first meeting with my in-laws took place at Michael's family home. It was a historic mansion in an upscale residential area in the suburbs of Buffalo. The moment I stepped through the front door, I was acutely aware of how different it was from the environment I grew up in. My father-in-law George was surprisingly approachable and helped ease my first meeting nerves. On the other hand, while my mother-in-law Eleanor welcomed me with perfect etiquette, there was something distant in her manner. Rachel, I'm pleased to welcome someone as cultured as you to this family. I felt there might have been a slight hint of sarcasm in my mother-in-law's words. Still, my feelings for Michael didn't waver. The wedding ceremony was held at St. Joseph's Cathedral. That day when Michael and I exchanged vows in the light streaming through the stained glass windows, my father-in-law congratulated us with a radiant expression. Rachel, you're my daughter now. Please don't hesitate to tell me anything. True to those words, my father-in-law treated me like his own daughter. Sunday afternoon walks in Delaware Park became our family tradition. After Oliver was born, my father-in-law's smile seemed to become even gentler. He watched over his grandson's intellectual curiosity and would sometimes search through his book collection for old children's books to give as presents. "I read this book when I was a child. Now I'd like Oliver to enjoy it." Conversations with my father-in-law always became animated when discussing books. His reading volume, from classic literature to contemporary novels, amazed me. A businessman with deep knowledge of literature, my father-in-law was an ideal conversation partner for me. Meanwhile, my relationship with my mother-in-law remained superficial. Weekend lunches at the Buffalo Club were like theatrical performances, purely formal affairs. Throughout our conversations, there were hints of our different family backgrounds. "Rachel, your table manners concern me a bit. But I'm sure you'll improve with practice." I could only smile at such comments from my mother-in-law. However, after Oliver's birth, my mother-in-law's attitude became even colder. "This child will be the heir to the Hamilton family. He needs a proper education." Behind those words, I could see her distrust of me. Still, my father-in-law's presence maintained the family's balance. His warm personality softened my mother-in-law's strictness and brought humanity to Michael's work-focused life. Everyone thought these peaceful, ordinary days would continue forever. That phone call came on a peaceful Sunday morning in early summer. "Dad had a heart attack." Michael's voice had lost its usual composure. At that moment, something froze inside me. Just yesterday, we had our normal routine. My father-in-law was feeding ducks with Oliver in Delaware Park. That image was still burned into my retina. The funeral was held quietly at St. Joseph's Cathedral. Many people who knew my father-in-law attended in the solemn atmosphere. Oliver didn't seem to fully understand what had happened yet. But he seemed to somehow know that his grandfather wouldn't be coming back. "Will I never see Grandpa again?" I choked on my words at that question. Beside me stood my mother-in-law in black mourning clothes, with a solemn expression. Not a single tear could be seen in her eyes. After the funeral, the family atmosphere began to change, slowly but surely. It was as if my father-in-law's presence had been like an invisible thread holding the family together. Michael suddenly became immersed in work. Though he had always been busy, now he was like a different person. He left for work earlier than anyone else, and returning home after midnight became the norm. Even on weekends, he was increasingly absent from home, citing emergency meetings. "I have to protect the company," following in father's footsteps. Michael's eyes looked somehow empty as he said this. Opportunities to have dinner together decreased dramatically, and promised trips to the zoo with Oliver were repeatedly postponed. Meanwhile, strange changes began to appear in my mother-in-law's behavior. She suddenly started showing strong interest in Oliver. She would visit 2 or 3 times a week, giving detailed instructions about Oliver's education. "This child carries Hamilton blood. He must be raised in a more suitable environment." Saying this, she brought one prestigious private kindergarten brochure after another. She even interfered with Oliver's clothing, buying large amounts of expensive designer children's clothes. Furthermore, she began forcefully encouraging outings on weekends. "Let's have him play with children from wonderful families at the country club." My opinions were ignored as if she had no ears to hear them. And my mother-in-law's visits became even more frequent. Sometimes she would appear at our house without warning and stay for hours. I began to feel anxious about these unnatural changes. One night, when Michael finally came home, I worked up the courage to bring it up. "Michael, I'm worried about your mother's recent behavior." "About Oliver." "Mother is seriously thinking about Oliver's future. You should be grateful rather than complaining." His response was colder than I expected. Michael's eyes never left his computer screen. "But Oliver is only 4. He needs more freedom to play." "Rachel, you might not understand, but this is the Hamilton way." Those words made my chest tighten. The gentle smile from when we first met at the library was no longer there. At night, watching Oliver's sleeping face alone, I was struck by a deep sense of loneliness. In the 3 months since my father-in-law's death, I could only watch as the family's shape slowly became distorted. Even my work at the library no longer brought the same joy. While reading books to children, anxiety about my own child's future would suddenly overwhelm me. How long would Oliver's innocent smile last? And my mother-in-law's gaze grew sharper day by day, as if she was plotting something. Sarah, my colleague at the library, seemed to notice the change in me. "Rachel, you haven't been yourself lately. Is something wrong?" There was so much I wanted to say, but I didn't know where to begin. In the end, I just put on my usual smile and said, "I'm fine." Who could understand the dark side of this upper-class life? Oliver's behavior also began to change. His innocent smiles became less frequent, and he showed excessive tension in front of his grandmother. At weekend lunches, he wasn't allowed to behave freely like a child, forced instead to act like a small adult. "Stand up straight. You're holding your knife and fork wrong. Aren't you ashamed?" As the Hamilton heir, Oliver would tremble slightly at his grandmother's harsh criticisms. I felt deep disappointment in Michael, who pretended not to notice. At night, Oliver sometimes began having nightmares. Sometimes he would wake up crying, saying, "I want to see Grandpa." At such times, all I could do was hold him tight. Still, I tried to maintain hope. Surely this was just temporary. Even if the family's shape changed, we could overcome it with love. But contrary to these thoughts, my anxiety grew day by day. The signs of autumn were beginning to creep into Buffalo. The maple leaves were starting to change color, and the morning and evening air was getting colder. Like the changing trees, I had a feeling our lives were heading in an irreversible direction. The proposal came suddenly on a chilly morning in early October. "Let's go to Niagara Falls." Just me, Rachel, and Oliver. My mother-in-law said this in an unusually soft tone during weekend lunch, as if it had been planned for years. "It should make for wonderful memories. Niagara is perfect this season." Those words sent a chill down my spine. My mother-in-law had never once suggested a family trip before. And why just the 3 of us, excluding Michael? "Thank you, but Oliver is still so young." "Oh, don't worry. I'll take care of everything." I sensed something cold beneath her gentle smile. Still, Michael immediately agreed. "Mother's suggestion is wonderful. Why don't you take time off work and go?" There was a slight force in my husband's words. I tried to decline several times, but in the end, I gave in to my mother-in-law's forceful persuasion. The morning of departure was overcast. Oliver unusually woke up early, changed into new clothes, and was fully prepared. We left Buffalo in my mother-in-law's car. The fog grew thicker on the way to Niagara. Oliver occasionally called out, "Mom," in a small voice while looking at the scenery through the car window. "It's going to be a wonderful day." I thought I saw my mother-in-law's lips twist slightly in the rearview mirror. Upon arriving at the tourist area, my mother-in-law guided us to a restaurant she said she had reserved. Niagara Falls was visible from the window, its roar shaking the building. After lunch, she suggested going to the observation deck. "Since we're here, let's view the falls from the best spot." It was past 2 p.m., a time when there were few tourists. When we reached the observation deck, thick fog had settled in. Visibility was only about 20 meters. Beyond the metal grating at our feet, we could see the rapids falling with a thunderous roar. Oliver excitedly tried to pull my hand toward the edge of the observation deck. That's when I heard my mother-in-law's voice from behind. "Rachel, I need to talk to you." When I turned around, Michael was standing there. I don't know when he had arrived. His expression had an unfamiliar coldness. "Michael, why are you here?" Before he could answer, my mother-in-law quickly grabbed Oliver's hand. "At this rate, the Hamilton name will be dragged through the mud." My mother-in-law's voice, though nearly drowned out by the fall's roar, was clearly audible. "Someone of your status can't be trusted with the heir's education." Oliver let out a frightened cry. As I tried to step forward, Michael grabbed my arm firmly. At the edge of the observation deck, my mother-in-law lifted Oliver. Their figures appeared dimly in the fog-wrapped space. "This child should disappear into the falls." My mother-in-law's scream echoed through the fog. And in the next moment, an unbelievable scene unfolded before my eyes. Oliver's small body being thrown from my mother-in-law's arms. "Mother is right." Michael's cold voice reached my ears. I desperately broke free of his grip and ran toward the edge of the observation deck, screaming. Through the fog, Oliver's figure disappeared. The sound of the rapids swallowed my screams. My hands shook as I gripped the metal grating of the observation deck. These mothers' eyes would never forget the sight of watching her child fall into the abyss. "Please, someone help." My screams dissolved into Niagara's roar. Tourists around began to stir, and someone was making an emergency call on their cell phone. At that moment, a ray of light broke through the fog. As if predicting a miracle. Tourists who heard my screams rushed to the observation deck all at once. Someone shouted, "911. Call 911 quickly." People with smartphones in hand. The scene appeared to be in slow motion. Desperately clinging to the metal grating of the observation deck, I kept staring into the fog. Searching for Oliver. The sight of my small child's body being swallowed by the rapids was still burned into my retina. "Stay calm. Rescue teams will be here soon." A young woman placed her hand on my shoulder. Her voice seemed to echo from far away. Michael and my mother-in-law had disappeared sometime during the commotion. The sound of sirens approached. I could see the bright red vehicles of the Niagara Falls Rescue Squad sliding into the tourist area. Led by Captain David Collins, the elite team quickly began to deploy. Please tell me your child's age and exact location of the fall. My son. Oliver is 4 years old, about 3 meters from here. Words failed me. The tears wouldn't stop. Captain Collins immediately took up his radio. 4-year-old male, fall from northeast section of observation deck. Deploy safety nets downstream immediately. Water search team, stand by. The rescue team members began moving with military-like precision. Tourists also voluntarily offered their help. I'm a nurse. Is there anything I can help with? I've had rescue training in local rivers. Please let me help. As people continued to step forward, an elderly man provided crucial information. Right after the fall, I saw something caught on the rocks below. Like yellow clothing. Oliver had been wearing a yellow jacket that morning, the one my mother-in-law had bought. The rescue team immediately responded to this information. Second transition point downstream, yellow clothing confirmed. Life signs detected. Repeat, life signs detected. My heart leaped at the voice coming from the radio. The rotor sound of a helicopter thundered overhead. A rescue cable was lowered, threading through the fog. A rescue team member began carefully descending, avoiding the dangerous water flow. 10 meters to target. Rock face condition stable. Beginning approach. Intermittent reports from the radio. Each word seemed to synchronize with my heartbeat. And then, the long-awaited voice rang out. Target secured. Vital signs good. Prepare for emergency transport. Cheers erupted. Someone was hugging me. The tears wouldn't stop. The rescue basket slowly rose. I could see a small yellow bundle inside. It was Oliver. Mama. Mama. Oliver called out to me in a hoarse voice. Though soaked and shivering, miraculously he had no major injuries. He had caught on a hollow in the rocks, which had become his lifeline. Oliver. You did so well. Mama's here. Before I could embrace him, the paramedics quickly took Oliver into their care. They wrapped him in blankets and began checking his vitals. At that moment, police sirens wailed. Multiple police vehicles arrived, and officers rushed up to the observation deck. Mrs. Rachel Hamilton. About the suspects who attempted to throw your child. Interrupting the officer's words, one of the tourists shouted. If you mean those two, they rushed toward the parking lot. They're trying to get into a black SUV. The officers rushed en masse toward the parking lot. And those sirens rang out again minutes later. I didn't see Michael and my mother-in-law being arrested. By then, I was already in the ambulance, holding Oliver's hand. It's okay. You're safe now. Oliver nodded slightly and closed his eyes, looking exhausted. The ambulance started toward Buffalo General Hospital, sirens wailing. Outside the window, the fog was slowly beginning to clear. As if waking from a nightmare. A week after the incident, in a room at Buffalo General Hospital, I held an envelope in my hands. Delivered by the hospital's legal counsel, it contained my father-in-law George's will. Oliver was sleeping quietly in the bed. Fortunately, he had no serious injuries and was scheduled to be discharged after a few days of observation. Outside the window, a light rain was falling under cloudy skies. Opening the envelope, my father-in-law's elegant handwriting jumped out at me. The date was 1 week before his death. To my beloved grandson Oliver. And to Rachel, my daughter whom I'm proud of. At that opening, my eyes immediately welled up with tears. I have watched my family for many years. My wife Eleanor and my son Michael. The two of them have gradually strayed from the values I've cherished. My father-in-law's words continued, quietly but powerfully. Eleanor became interested only in her social status. Surrounded by luxury brands, even charitable activities became nothing more than opportunities for self-promotion. Michael began walking the same path. He forgot to consider others' feelings and pursued only profit. I carefully absorbed each of my father-in-law's words. Indeed, Michael had become like a different person from when we first married. This became even more pronounced after my father-in-law's death. However, Rachel, you and Oliver were different. The sight of you reading books to children at the library. Watching birds in the park on holidays. Your pure hearts deeply moved me. Tears rolled down my cheeks as memories of my father-in-law flooded back like a slideshow. That's why I made my decision to write this will. 40% of Hamilton Investment Company's shares will be inherited by Oliver. However, until he reaches adulthood, I appoint Rachel as the trustee of this property. I caught my breath at that line. To entrust me with such a huge responsibility. As for Eleanor and Michael, I regrettably had to be disappointed. Their values are no longer compatible with my ideal vision for the Hamilton family. And in the final paragraph, all the mysteries were revealed. This will was created in the presence of my primary physician and lawyer. And unfortunately, Eleanor accidentally discovered its existence in my study. That's why her behavior suddenly changed. My father-in-law had known. He had noticed his wife's changes. But the time between that premonition and its becoming reality was far too short. If anything unexpected happens after my death, this will shall tell the whole story. Rachel, I believe in you and Oliver. I felt my father-in-law's strong will in the final line. At that moment, there was a knock on the hospital room door, and 2 detectives quietly entered. We've finished questioning Eleanor and Michael Hamilton. According to their confession, after my mother-in-law found the will, she persuaded Michael. If only Oliver were gone, the inheritance would be theirs. That twisted logic led to the intent to murder their son. They will both be charged with attempted murder. We have sufficient evidence. I nodded quietly at the detective's words. More than hatred, a deep sadness filled my chest. In the bed, Oliver turned over slightly. Looking at his innocent sleeping face, I found new hope. Outside the window, the rain was beginning to let up. A soft light broke through the clouds, gently illuminating the hospital room. We would now begin walking a new path in life. Just as my father-in-law had believed in us, we would pursue happiness in its truest sense. Gently holding Oliver's hand, I made a quiet vow. To protect what truly matters, not money or status. Welcome back, Mrs. Hamilton. Rose, our apartment building's manager, greeted me with her usual kind smile. The warmth of the people in this town has become our great support. While preparing dinner, the news came on TV. Sentences have been finalized in the attempted murder case at Niagara Falls. Defendant Eleanor Hamilton has been sentenced to 12 years in prison, and defendant Michael Hamilton to 10 years. Oliver was playing with building blocks and didn't seem to notice the news content. I quietly changed the channel. After the sentencing, I heard from the lawyer. Michael had submitted divorce papers, and I would be granted full custody. Neither my mother-in-law nor Michael had expressed any words of remorse during their imprisonment. Hamilton Investment Company was transferred to new management by decision of the board of directors. My father-in-law's wishes were honored, and Oliver's inheritance would be managed by me as a trust fund. The company's new policies include community contribution and cultural support. Mom, I'm hungry. Oliver's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. As I hurried to prepare dinner, the doorbell rang. Hey, Oliver. I brought the book I promised. Captain Collins stood there with a cheerful expression, holding new picture books in his arms. Uncle David. Oliver ran over happily. I decided to invite them both for dinner. Sitting around the table, Captain Collins began speaking in a gentle tone. Your grandfather was truly a wonderful person. Every year, he made donations to the rescue squad. Thanks to that support, many lives were saved. I learned that my father-in-law's kindness continues to live on in various ways. Seasons change, and wounds slowly heal. But there are things we must never forget. True wealth is never about money or status. It's about bonds between people and hearts that care for others. Outside the window, the evening sky was turning a deep indigo. Tomorrow will bring another new day. After all, our story is still continuing.